and there's a form in there called Memorandum of Agreement and Memorandum of Understandings. Those need to be done by the tribes. It's kind of, you know, when you really read that manual, you really want to see how somebody is, how a system can be so manipulative with words. You read that manual. Boy, they really pay respect to us as the 9 great tribes, but yet when these projects come by, including not just the gold, including the KXL pipeline. So when we're dealing with uranium and all these attacks upon what's happening here in the Black Hills, that's where you're going to get that information. And that's why we give you that information, so we're not so dumbfounded when these things happen. And that's what we're finding. Across the board, our elders, our society members, our tribal leaders are dumbfounded. And then they push it on to the attorneys. And we have attorneys in each tribe has their own tribal attorneys. There's a set budget for them. And those attorneys that are supposed to help us and represent us do not understand that. And so so back to the uranium and the Dewey Burdock project in how we, you know, that's a long history there. It goes back into the 70s, into the 50s, that whole area of Edgemont, and how they always been after that uranium there, and everything else that's in that dirt. Whatever, there's already been testing. And so over here, there's another map. And this is where the Dewey Burdock area is. And the Tennessee Valley Authority came through back in the 40s to survey that area, and those are their maps. And there was like over, I would say, from anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 boreholes in that area. And those boreholes, they go, you know, way, I would say, thousands of feet, you know, to study the Black Hills and what's in there. So those boreholes are still open. And they're in fact, this Dewey Burdock project, which is under this PowerTech Zarga company. This company wants to use those old boreholes, right? So there's a lot that we want to address at this summit. For sure, we want to address this NEPA process. For sure, we're going to address the cultural relevance in this NEPA process and how that isolates the Unshika Indian. You know, I was taught to remember the Unshika Indian because we're all Unshika. We're all pitiful. We're all being annihilated by this genocide in different forms. It's not no surprise. We've been living like this for centuries, you know, since they came. So when we want to deal with it, this is how we're going to deal with it. We're not going to sugarcoat any of this. We're not going to say, you know, it's one-sided and we should promote that other side. Or, you know, there's some sort of balance there. We're just going to give this to you how it is. And you're going to be able to digest that. Because we have those medicines within our people. We have those minds within our people. We have the degrees. We have everything amongst our people to rise up. We have everything here. There should be no reason why this is happening to us. This is no excuse. You know, we come across these archaeological surveyors and this anthropology and this paleontology. You know, they take the Lakota mind and they push us down, and they say, you know, they want to isolate us out of these meetings and these hearings because we don't have a big degree. You know, it's a fact that they still can't explain Stonehenge. They're still wondering what Stonehenge is, what it's for. And here we are, we still have our sacred sites all here, and they're still intact. We can still return there. And then yet we're not up there yet. You know, I grew up in an era of 7 sacred rites, 7 sacred sites. You know, in each generation we come up to that. How are we going to get back in there? How are we going to do this? Are we going to stay contained to the reservation and stay contained to our reservation and do our ceremonies there? That wasn't our original teaching. So a lot of the spiritual law, implementing spiritual law, that's what we're going to keep pushing, because we didn't make those stories up. We don't have time to make stories up like that. Those are facts. That is law. You know, those prophecies, how they told us those 7 sacred rites, that's that one that nobody should ever forget. You should, your own life, that you're supposed to conduct those ceremonies throughout your life and bring those back. It's supposed to be natural movement with the earth. You're supposed to be in rhythm with the earth and the universe in your own right. It's no competition. You owe that to the Creator. You owe that to our ancestors to live that way of life. Nobody should be telling you what to do, because you should already have your discipline and yourself in check. Because we live by that Chinupa. We don't die, dishonoring that Chinupa. We know, the Washichu, they honor that Bible. We honor that Chinupa. That Chinupa knows the truth. And after we're done here, we're going to have that. We're going to journey across the universe. And they always say, if you lived a good life, they're going to come for you. You're going to go right through there. You're going to be back over there because they're going to get you lived a good life. They don't want you to suffer in that universe. I didn't understand that till I started studying the universe and understanding about earthworms and black holes, and there's places for you to get lost out there. It's not an easy life. So back to implementing the spiritual law and sticking on that. What Desangui said, and in fact, we get sidetracked with that. I respect my elders and I listen to them, but I know for a fact that we're not living those 7 sacred rites. We're not going back to those sites. In fact, we have land here in the Black Hills, and our children, our grandchildren aren't being offered that chance to go up there and have ceremony. That's what we should be promoting. We wonder why we're lost. We wonder why our children are, committing suicide, and why they're doing all this stuff to hurt themselves. We already have that within us. We need to open that doorway for them. Open those paths for them so they can get back on there. And they can get back on their sacred journey and help us. Because fighting these uranium companies, fighting these gold companies, it's overwhelming. We need them here. We need them listening. We need them educated. So back to implementing spiritual law. We need to go back to teaching that and living it. Those 7 sacred rites. I want to see just a show of hands. Who's done their 7 sacred rites? Who's been working on them? That tells a lot about you. That's what she said to do. That's what's supposed to carry us into this world we can't control. It's supposed to bring us back to who we are. So anyway, we have Hanan Legary, and Hanan Legary worked for the Oglala College for I would say about a long time, over 10 years I would say. And he's done a lot of this work on the aquifers. He's in these hearings, testifying scientifically. This is kind of the in situ leach process over here, and all the things that could possibly go wrong. We always reference this website called www.wise, write that down, wiseuranium.com or .org. And it's like a global website that they keep track of all the uranium impacts. So if you don't know something, we don't have that system set up for people to be notified that, this is going to impact your water. They have that. Actually, I'm not going to take that back. They do have a system for that. They have registrars, and but it's not going to personally come to your door. It doesn't personally come to your, unless we have a group out there, a watchdog group that notifies. So dealing with the Weiss uranium, you want to know history on like Pro Butte. You want to know history on Dewey Burdock. You want to know history on the Wyoming side. Go to this website. It tells you all the history of when they applied for their permit, how they got it, how many leaks and spills they've had in their history. All that is vital information in that website. And then over here, so when they mine for this uranium, it's in the aquifers. And this other one over here, I wish that could come up, but it shows you like the Crow Butte area, how that is all one body of water, and how that's getting into our drinking water on the Pine Ridge Rosebud Reservation, how we have increased health impacts, and how we haven't kept up to it. Yeah, just go to Weiss Uranium on that one, and then you would just go to a quick Google search, and that would be that website right there. And so you would go, I mean, it's global, so you're gonna know markets all over the world, and then you would click on here, go to North America, and it's gonna give you proposed, old, and new, in that little, so you gotta decide which one you wanna look at, the old, the current, or the new. And the whole reason that what brought us together with this is the acid leach. You know, they're switching up this aquifer mining into acid leach mining. So, and that's, you know, you think about acid and how that changes the chemistry of our water. And those are, and then on the Wyoming side, the headwaters, we do the strata. So that's the uranium website that, you know, if you really want to keep track of everything, that's where you would go. And then this is strata, this is where the acid leach. On the Wyoming side, you know, when we deal with state entities or state government, Wyoming has surpassed all the tribes, yet they know we're here. And it's like a game that they play with the tribes to see who's gonna do what. And if we don't tell them anything, or we tell a president that isn't so attentive, you know, then because these federal entities get notification to presidents and TIPOs, but on the Wyoming side, when they're state, they don't tell. The Wyoming would never tell about any of these uranium mines. So this one up here, this Lance one, that's the one that's turning into acid leach. So you can almost assume that after that's done, all these are going to turn into acid leach. Over here, you know, this is us up here, Rapid City. This is the Black Hills. This is that Dewey Burdock right here on this side. This is the Crow Butte. And then all the uranium mines. And then we call this area over here, this is starting to get into that continental divide. And so this area right here, when you look at a map of how those headwaters come out of that area, it's like they all go in 4 directions into this area. So you get these ones coming out over here one direction, then you get these ones coming this direction, and then there's some that come into, and these ones go into the west side of the United States, into Washington and Oregon. So that, you know, are over in this no uranium and treaty territory. That is what we're dealing with right there. You want to know how smart our ancestors were? They knew that they were going to come for the headwaters. And you look at where those headwaters are, you look at how and this is aquifer mining. These are in the aquifers. This isn't open pit. Some of them are open pit. They still do that, but it's been kind of the safer new way to mine is in the aquifer. So then you go back over here and you can look at these aquifers. And of course, you know, we're going to run into, I mean, just looking at that, you know, I feel overwhelmed. I feel mad. You know, I feel angry every time I look at that map. I want to cry that they did this. And this is the state of Wyoming. And then you got the state of South Dakota. So this project manager for this Dewey Burdock area, this is our big topic, because this Crow Butte was approved. Then Dewey Burdock, it's in the permit process. And so they got to go through all these because they mine below ground. And then you go into these agencies that are supposed to be watching the underground. So that Bureau of Land Management, and who's the other one, Julie? EPA, right? EPA is doing deep injection public comment right now. Basically, deep injection is just they're gonna put, utilize their process and then inject that waste back in the aquifer. So it's like, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it just, I mean, the way I think about it is like your body, the earth is like our body, and that's the heart. And then there's a piece, the aquifer, where our bodies contain aquifers, say our liver and our kidneys. And then they're going to go mine our kidney for this uranium, comparing the uranium process to a kidney. And then they're going to put back their waste back in that kidney. And it's not, in our Lakota mind, it doesn't make any sense. But in their mind, it's safe, and we're going to profit. So that's where we're contradicting in our worlds. Our worlds always contradict, So anyway, we have Hannon Legary. He's our aquifer expert. Lots of information that he can share. And then the profiles, we're going to go into Leola and some of the elders talking about caves and fault lines, because when we're dealing with these aquifer mining, like that Dewey Burdock area, oh man, I wish I could pull this on the screen for you, but the USGS gives out these maps for free. And this is how you would understand what's happening around and in the Black Hills, because in this book, they show you those fault lines. You don't know what fault lines look like, it's there. The information is there. And so where they want to mine is kind of down here, and there's a bunch of fault lines. And it's really weird because there's Beaver Creek, even though it's on this side, then it pops out by Buffalo Gap. Like some of these springs in here, like they'll go underwater, and they'll pop up somewhere else. So all this is interesting. And then, so the caves, when you think about surveys and how we do our archaeological surveys and all this science, to this very day, they haven't allowed the Lakota people or even the indigenous people back into their caves, or how to talk about, they'll bring a science expert in that wants to explain clouds or air, and we have our own. So that's what we want in those hearings, is to try to get that, not tell everything, because they exploit us. So you have that fear of telling too much because they might steal something and utilize it at another capacity. So we're scared of that. But at the same time, if we can address this in those hearings, that there's science, they don't have that. And the thing about the fault lines is, we're Pte Oyate, and we're the people that dance on those fault lines. Our people would dance on those buffaloes would dance on those fault lines to make springs. When the people didn't have water, they had that relationship, and they would pray to each other and talk to each other, and those buffaloes would come make water for the people, because they know that we needed water. And can science they can't even understand that. Their mind, it will take a while for them to understand that. And with the fault, so those back to fault lines, and how do we know that those uranium mines or those oil and gas spills aren't gonna, ruin those fault lines, or what's gonna come out of them? Those boreholes we deal with. This work, it takes you to super funds. So when they have super funds, kind of the constant thing is when they're those aquifers, just like you have a septic system or sewer system, sometimes it leaks and it breaks and then it comes to the ground. So then our relatives that drink out of those areas, they're going to be, they don't know. You can't see, you can't tell where radiation is. That's why we live in this nuclear era. And we as indigenous people, we have to keep up with that radiation. We have to keep up with these contaminants. So, we have caves and fault lines, and then we'll move into the Jeff Parsons. He's the Dewey Burdock. The Dewey Burdock would have been opened by now, and going into that was Uncle Wilmer Mestith, who was a former Tipple, and he called Jeff Parsons, and that was kind of history on how, the NEPA process has been steamrolled. We can't keep up, and so that's another tactic that we want our tribes and our attorneys and our people to look at, is that NEPA process, not to take off and survey. Our methodology, that's what you go into with that science, is that methodology. And our methodology has always been ceremony first. Ceremony first, because when you, archaeological survey will automatically destroy what's there. They're not going there, they're going there for science. They're not going there for ceremony. Our ceremonies are ahead of science. That's why we supposedly have these religious freedom. Our religious freedom are on these sites. And then we'll go talk into, there was a super fund down in Oklahoma where there was piles and it was collecting, and these birds were living in the burrows of these piles. And so they studied these birds that were in that area, and what's happening is, instead of their contaminants going right to their blood and going out of their body, they're going into their feathers. And so when you think about ceremony again and how we use our feathers, those feathers are now radioactive. It's starting to impact our ceremonies on levels we can't keep up with. If we go in that Dewey Burdock area, if we go follow that headwater, there's so much going on in that Cheyenne River. That used to be the good river. They call it Wakwashicha. It's not good no more. And then we want to go have ceremony in this area, Dewey Burdock area, which is winter camp area. And we want to go put a sweat lodge there and bring that water from that river and put it in our sweat lodge like we've always done. We're putting that contaminant into our sweat lodge. Who's going to start? When are we going to start waking up to that? Our welcoming ceremony, we bring those babies into the world, how we want to bring them back. Go back to that. We go into a teepee, we lay on the ground, and that baby's going to be born into what? Uranium contamination. They're too young to experience that. When you look at radiation on a microscope, and you look at it, those alpha, gamma, all those rays, it looks like asteroids. All over, it has no order to it, it's just all over. So when your cells are regenerating and they're trying to make you exist in this world, trying to make your organs function, your blood, all those cells in your body, that radiation is slicing and dicing all those particles in your body, all those cells. And we go into ceremony, into the site, and that's what we're bringing home. And it's not like it's not happening now, because we go to Bear Butte, Matopaha, and there's a super fund up the road from there. And that's putting impact on us. So we're here to give you this information, not to step back and look the other way. We've never been those people. We have to be those people to face this storm, this radioactive storm coming for us. It's in the air, it's in the water, it's in our ceremonies, it's in our food. We have traditional ceremonial food. That bakwa that we get that bakwa from, boy, we're really, if you can't see it, again, I'm not going to sugarcoat this and say that they're kindly doing this to us, you know. I'm not going to say that. They're annihilating us. They don't want us here. They want us out of the way. They've created these ways to keep us out of the way. Indians, go to the reservation. Indians, go to your cage, you know. And we don't, we want someone to fall from the sky, some lawyer to fall from the sky, somebody to help us. We need our tribal government to step up. You know, when you get into these big hearings, they won't hear anybody else unless they always fight over that. Well, who do we listen to? What Indian do we listen to? What token Indian is going to come? And you know, it's the one that they're going to choose. They get to pick. And they get to pick that for us. It's not, we're just a number to them. So, in that system, they manipulate it. They say government to government, nation to nation. And we need our tribal council. That's where they put it. It's not, you know, our Oglala Sioux Tribe has a government to government process to stop these companies from steamrolling us. So the tribal council made a government to government process. So a president can't talk for us. So a natural resources director doesn't go off the whim and survey for us. Or a TIPO doesn't take off and survey and get it fast tracked. You know, they have that set up. And the beauty of our ancestors is that they really did know that. And we just have to listen to them. They already set it up for us. We just listen to them and do what they said. This government to government, our tribal council, you know, each of our districts, we have a tribal council rep. So then we go, because they set up that system like that government to government, we need our tribal council strong. We need them ahead of us. It shouldn't be me standing here, it should be those tribal councils. I'm not the government to government. So once we get them caught up, we get our treaty councils caught up, we get our elders caught up, you know, we get all our councils of people set up, and we need to return. We need to get back in there. We need to go hold space there, our ceremonies there where they're supposed to be. And we need to live that again. Because these projects have become fast-tracked to where we can't even keep up with them. But we can do this. We have lawyers. We brought Jeff Parsons here. We brought all the experts here. So we can get together and we'll keep coming back. We'll keep coming to your community. We'll keep organizing. But everybody needs, whatever you're good at, whatever you do, you step into that role now. And you live it. Because there's no time to waste anymore. Okay, did Hannon McGarry ever show up? No. Okay, we're waiting on Hannon. He's on the schedule. So we're going to go with, we're looking at, I hope everybody got something to eat. And at lunch, we have soup over at the Oyate Center. So if you don't have a ride, let us know and we'll make sure you get over there. Below ground, caves and fault lines. I know I covered that kind of real brief. And then we have National Environmental Policy Act, which is the NEPA, with Jeff Parsons. And then we'll go into, you know, at the end, before lunch, we want to do a tribal legal action, tribal, like, a strategy. You know, what would be your ideas to how we can deal with this? You know, our strategy. What do we want to do? There's different things that we could do, and we have a lot of I really appreciate all of you coming. Your input is greatly appreciated. You know, we go into these hearings, and we heard a gentleman from, I guess, Ocheti Shakoi, and he had stated that he was the only one that could identify a sacred site. My heart just dropped to the floor, like, and it shattered. Like, how could someone be so arrogant to say that he was the only one that could identify a sacred site? And how do we deal with that? When we have so many of our elders, so many of our people here, and we're not going out there for archaeological reasons, we're going out there for ceremony. There's a difference there, and that's going to be talked about into the methodology. Okay. All right. Okay, so we'll go with move on to the caves and the fault lines. I guess we just open this up and walk it around and show them where the fault lines are. And then the lady, if she could fix some of the speakers in here, we kind of want this fixed if possible. One of the Oh, it would help if I turn it on, huh? It's kind of digital. It's not a switch like it used to be. Okay, so we have caves and fault lines, and I'm really honored for Leola to be here, and for Leland, Little Dog, and Uncle Richard, Moose Camp was going to make it. We asked him to come, and then Uncle Richard Broken Nose. Uncle Richard Moose Camp lives up to Wombly. And then we were asking Uncle Rick, Two Dogs, also to be here so they could talk about the caves, talk about the fault lines. Just recently there was a tornado in the Dewey Burdock area, and it was like, well, can your science go out there and stop that tornado from hitting this uranium mine? But we have our medicine people that could probably do that, we live like that, so I just wanted to ask them to come up and talk about this in the caves. I know, we come out of Wind Cave, but there's so much knowledge, there's so much miles and miles of caves down there. And some of the stories that were shared with me was that you can come through, like, over on the west side, by Matotipila, which is Devil's Tower, and then go in and pop out through another area. And underneath there's six aquifers. 3 of them are in Lakota, and there's a pre-Cambrian way below there. So we'll bring these maps around and let you look at them if you want, but they explain everything in here. So Leola and Leland and let me see. I don't know how do you guys want to all come up and talk, or do you guys just want to say your piece and then move on? We'll probably need more microphones. Excuse me. Could we get more microphones? Maybe move a table up here, and you can sit down here. How about that? Okay.
Good morning. While she's getting ready, a lot of this work we've been doing for a long time. I want to thank Leland, Little Dog, and Stan Redbird. Stan's not here, and our project editor was Ron Goodman. And my history was growing up in the Black Hills with a grandmother who was very concerned that if they didn't teach us when we were young, we would never ever remember. So I did a ceremony at Wind Cave when I was 7 years old. My grandmother took me to other caves that this is the hard part, is that our elders knew that life was really sacred and these sites were really sacred, so many of these things, we didn't write them down. only for the protection of making sure that this, our information wasn't exploited, so we have a lot of that in our background. But again, how I joined the project in 1983, or actually 1982, was with Ron Goodman and the old man Stanley Redbird, and Leland and Stan Jr. were the ones that actually did the research, figured it out, wrote it down, and we were all doing different parts, so my story might be a little bit different from my family. And you have to remember that because we had Ocheti, Shakoi, and the Teton alone have 7 bands, so you might have 7 variations, but they're all the same place. So whenever we go into consultation, what it usually occurs with all of them, forestry, BLM, different agencies, what they try to do right away is separate us or interview one of our tribes and then have another record and say, well, this doesn't match their record. And although it's all accurate, so we haven't been fooled by that with the academia. And I'm one of those people like Tanya, I could talk all day about all kinds of things. But pass it over to Leland here in a minute, but I wanted to tell one story about the disappearing river. And it's something that we should really teach our kids about how we got the war bonnet. The Oglala band, we call the bonnet war bonnet for the very reason, and I knew this story as a little girl, so I went to interview my grandfather, Oscar Hollowhorn, my grandma's cousin. And he told me, he said, this story is really important because it talks about the leadership, the Wichasha, Itacha, and how we acquired the war bonnet. So a man goes hunting and he didn't find anything, so he made a fire and he was sitting there eating wasna. A skeleton approached him and said, if you wrestle with me and if you win, I will give you a prize. So as he wrestled the skeleton, who was really strong, somehow each time he got it close to the fire, the skeleton would get weak. So he finally won the wrestling match, and the skeleton said, give me some wasna. And he gave it to him, and the skeleton ate it. You could see the food moving, although there wasn't a visible body. And he told him, go 2 creeks from here, and over a bluff overlooking the river, you're going to find the wapaha, which you'll put on a stick, a crooked stick, and you will defend your people. And those same feathers you'll take and you put on your head, and you defend the people for as long as you live. So I really look for this story because this creek disappears. It's called War Bonnet, and it comes around from behind Hudson, Maine. And it's one of those places that you're not going to read about because it's a very tragic place in 1879 when Dull Knife's people escaped from Fort Robinson. 38 of them were chased to this place, Horseshoe Canyon, and that's where they massacred them. And to further add degradation to their crime, they stripped them of all their clothes as war trophies so that they would have something to take back to show their families what they did to us. So when I went to that place when I was a little girl, because we have that Cheyenne background, when we got out the car, my grandmother would start crying. So that's how I learned history. Going to these places, these sites we consider sacred, and hearing our grandparents crying. But I wanted to share that because War Bonnet goes underground and it resurfaces over here east of the the Black Hills. So these rivers and creeks can disappear because of the fault lines underground. And we don't have any control over that because they always tell us Mother Earth is sacred. When she wants to take a breath, she shakes herself. Or if there's something inside of her that isn't good for her, she'll spew it out, like volcanoes. So these are things that we've been taught to be very respectful to when we go to these places so that we don't distort what they told us. So I'll pass the mic over to Leland, and he's more of an expert than me, so you'll like his story.
Good boys, Buffalo. Washitia, Leland, Little Dog, much of Atewa chat, hey, new me hashnet, was Shangel, Ina chat, Kahisa, Black Crow, Wajaji. Good morning. Very glad to be here. Glad to see everybody here. Like Tanya said earlier, everybody knows something, so let's all put it together. And we know that whatever we look for with a sincere heart, we're going to find it. On my father's side, I'm Cheyenne. I come from No Two Horns. On my mother's side, I'm Sichungu Wajaji from Black Crow. My clan is Wajaji. In 1990, I was planning to go to Berkeley, and I did a linoleum block print with 2 triangle teepees with the Black Hills in the middle and stars on top. And I didn't know that that was the central symbol for what was called the Star Knowledge Research Project, begun at St. English University by Ronald Goodman and Stanley Rickard Sr. The first edition of the book came out, and there's a second edition that I inherited, and it's the collective knowledge of all our people. I myself have not done many of these, but I know from doing research that I learned things on my own too. And what we're going to talk about is sacred oral tradition. It's no different from the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, which are written. Ours happens to be sacred because everything that we need to know is written up in the stars, which are the visible breath of the Creator, and is different from astrology. It's not astrology. This morning I'd like to talk about Washun, about caves. Wind Cave is probably the most important place that we need to protect. And I know things about Wind Cave that I may share later. I'm still deciding how much to share, like Tanya said earlier. But our origin stories say that 7 people originated from Wind Cave. And if you look up at the night sky, the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, that tells a story. There were 3 men, which are the handle stars, and 4 women, which are the bowl stars. Now this is different from the Adam and Eve approach that came from overseas, about 1 man and 1 woman. And this is the beginning of our Tioshpai. And we emerged from Wind Cave, which is very important because I've been working on human origins as well. But there are other caves. We have 2 where I come from on Sichungu Mapoche. Probably the more better known one is called Buffalo Butte. It's about 20 miles east of Winter, South Dakota, or about an hour and a half east of us, towards the Missouri River. And the sacred story with that is that the Buffalo Dreamer medicine man was able to bring buffalo out in times of need. And when he took as much as we needed, and the buffalo would go back in. And Mr. Paul Leadercharge was one of the sources for the story. He said there was a young woman who was on her cleansing time, and she knew better than to go there, but because it was such a thing to witness, she went anyway. And after that, the buffalo quit coming out the Wind Cave. And the medicine man, the last one that was able to do that, he's buried right near that spot, an unmarked grave. Today it's become fee land and it's a tourist attraction. It's a hunting lodge, one of our sacred sites, our sacred caves. And I've always taken everything on faith that the things that we were told are true, because we live by the Chilimba, like Tommy said. And I heard about another story closer to Rosebud, right at home. And the creek was called Bull Creek, which translates to Tachungawakpa. And that story that our people know is that a white buffalo calf used to bring the buffalo out, and then we would kill as much as we need, and the white buffalo calf would lead them back into the cave. Until recently, probably in the 1800s, somebody shot the white calf with a hide, and after that, the buffalo quit coming out. And so I and my friends, we've always wondered where this buffalo cave was, and we looked and looked, but we couldn't find it. When the water table was higher at Rosebud, along the Oglala Aquifer down towards the Nebraska line, everything was different. And I found a map reconstructing old creek beds. And we spent a lot of time in prayer, in ini, in ceremony, personal prayer, wondering about this cave. And there was a cemetery there, it's still there. There was a cemetery of unbaptized Lakota people that weren't allowed to be buried at the St. Francis Catholic Cemetery. And these people were ghost dancers, they're peeled people, they were people that did not convert. And for some reason, their cemetery was on this small hill. And one night, we were driving through there, I and another person, and right in front of us, we saw something cross. So I asked her, was it a dog? Was it a horse? Was it a deer? And she said, no, no, no. So I said, did it look like a small white buffalo calf to you? And she said, that's what I saw, but I wanted to know what you were going to say. And then it dawned on me that that was the sacred site of that cave that we were looking for, because those Lakota people wanted to be buried there. The non-baptized people that weren't allowed to be buried at the other Catholic cemetery. And that's what I meant by, if we look for something with a sincere heart, we're going to find it. And I'm also aware that along the river, up the river on the east bank of the Rickeraws, I have a similar cave too. It's the same thing, Buffalo Cave. There's Ludlow Cave up this way. So we need to start paying particular attention to what Tanya said earlier, that these are inherent. And I'm not going to get into a debate over semantics, over spiritual or religious, but these are sacred sites. And it's time that we start telling some of our story that we've carried in our hearts. Because like she said, we don't know what people are going to do with these. We don't know if they're going to take them and go on a lecture circuit, or what they're going to do, if it's going to live on the internet. So as the meeting goes on, I'll be telling you things that I've learned from the Star Knowledge Research Project. And we wrote a letter to Sindeglash University opposing the sale of it on the internet. It was only intended for our people and teachers of our young people, no matter what race or tribe they are, because they need to know who we are. And I've also learned from an Aztec person that the Aztecs made periodic pilgrimages to the Black Hills from where they are down there. And that man said, we came up on foot. But he wasn't sure which cave it was or where it was, but he said he was going to do some more research on it. And as we know, the Black Hills is really a sacred, special place on the face of the earth. So later on, I'll be telling you about our sacred oral tradition regarding Wind Cave that I learned from my grandfather, Joe Flanagan, and from others. And I'll decide how much to share as we go along. But I'm really interested in meeting the people who are here on behalf of science and sacred sites. Rushdie, why that's what I will say for now. But my emphasis here is that these sacred things are real. I've experienced them. I've seen the white cat. And it left no tracks in the stove. So we tell our young people, especially the ones that are suicidal, we say, go to those places, pray. Those Fugashla are there. The Tchanka is there. The Snawi is there. I'll speak to you later. I'll pass it on.
Okay. Utaklepi. Ja. Santoastana bechuza. Ako sarzekia uchaplo biliacho. Macha.
Oh.
Atewa kia honey. World War II Akitsika. Germany ta. Ucha Kasaya Kawicha Ucha. Ihaicha Kitan. Ucha Lodi. You can't have done Muchika. Atewa. Mukhanta. Lakota Lamaka. Ucha Lodi. Now, in that case, the harmonia amongst my youth, Kaka and Munchi, and I say, you will be each other, will wounded. Could lead a lot. They told me, they said a lot to me. Well, they said, like you, I could be low that Hakola hell, a town. Well, how do you come from? There's a lot of legends that have connection, like hills that we have today, legends. Hunky, the paper on common. Gitana, what I'm gonna say in Washington. Lakota little bit hockey in Washington. Many of you don't. Lakota weather what is it to do? Okay, we will now argue the merits of scientific theory versus native beliefs and legendary. We do believe that the ancient explanations of Earth's beginnings, of man's beginnings, have a place of beauty in the history of man's thought. The legend explaining the creation of Black Hills, however, is one that most stirs the imagination. This is why that is a story of Kinyak, Amakastan, Mojalas, Gilum, Hednik. Hero Makiakon, Etande, Black Hills was actually born Kinyak, Etan. Today, sometimes called and run it as a sacred hoop run, spiritual 500-mile run. Me and my family took part in that a lot. And I used to tell the young runners, there's other ways of showing your bravery. That honey, Akishita Yeshne, Logana Kyoyaki Lobhe, Wakam, Yankom, Nena. No, Moch, Chihuahua, the town Chagan, they lost family members, so they prayed for them while they're running. beginning, how we come together at Bearview and leave from there all the way around the sacred, imagine the sacred route around Mount Black Hill.这个跟他什么健康？呀，我来哈，我那我还有看，我给你，哎，这是我算是完了。There's a surrounding around the Black Hills that you can see from the eye in the sky. They still have the formation on the Black Hills. They don't have a luck in that cave. This is very sacred. This is sacred to us. As the honky hetze Oglala Sioux to honey doxian nitrona, then I let you cock it, cook your cup. Hey, you thank you. You're gonna come. You know what hokum kill. You know what common hokum. Not on doxian, 20 pesos. Now, P.P.S. Here, on cup. These legends they tell, they never force it on us. We listen. How interesting it gets in our language. All these legends upon how we came from the cave. The actual events relate in the story, practice of the religious belief, ritual. As I heard them in my youth, will always remain with me. All the time in my life. I want to hear what I'm hearing. It's kind of 20 laham ikis Oglala. Nobody's not that much into the Lakota language anymore. Ikis Oglala willingly speak about these events. And you smell them, it's kind of big, gets a little hazy and you kind of forget some. But then again, it almost all seems like a dream when you come together with your mind. So you recall everything. That's grandma and grandpa. Hey, helps we call it at the end of the legend of Lakota. There were faults or breaks in the crust of the earth, either shifting upward or dropping downward. And this must have happened long ago, and that's the legend they always tell us. Almost Hashkan Lathan Kiyankana. It says, étant voici monsieur qui rend. C'est l'aide de Charles Berg. Monsieur qui rend. Traçant qu'on joue et lire d'appeler. Maintenant, oui, il y a un tel yon et bon con. C'est bien, qui a dit. Ah, il y a quel branche. En contre encore. Et au chabanan, au hier. Un petit globe, who knows about you? Ese mojo aka ake mojo ma chekia. So tiwahe umkong kineniu ha le woye kinena woya train kinena. Ie tuksogana chintin na humpo na chelwa yaka. It's good to hear them, the legend and the development of Black Hills. I'm not really a good speaker, but I just want to share a lot that I know. And someday, I will probably write it down. 저는 좀 오체kin 그라고 하면 뭐그래도 혹시 이거는 그런 기가 뭐야 해야 그래서 와해 오프라 와니까 더 삼이요 앞으로만 앞으로
I wanted to share another story and also apologize. My Lakota name is Katia Bawashnemi, good woman. I got this name when I was 7 years old, and it comes from Chief Buffalo Back Camp. And so when they gave me this name, it was so that I would always feed people who come to my home. And I would always open my doorway and teach people what I knew. So I've tried to do this all my life. So I wanted to share another cave story. And it's so sacred that it just brings tears to my eyes. And when I was at the uranium hearing the other day, I testified for my granddaughter, Anna Mae, right here. Anna Mae is one of 23 children born on Pine Ridge with Down syndrome, which is a really high number in our population. The same thing I've seen among the Mohawk people who lived along the St. Lawrence Seaway. Same thing, children who don't never grow up, they become adults, but their minds stay as children. And the other community I went to visit where they have very rank laws where they never clean their mess was Nevada City, California. When these miners left the Black Hills and made their money, they had investments that they did with our gold and our silver and our resources they took. That was Nevada City, California. Another area high in autism. They just say autism. They don't say radiation affected children. So my story with my granddaughter is really amazing because we just had a doctor convicted on a reservation, Dr. Weber, and that makes me suspicious. So I was late coming because I never go to the hospital. I rely on medicine men like Leland and other medicine people who they can administer herbs to us. So Anna Mae's story is really interesting because she didn't have a hole in her heart or her lung, and the state of South Dakota kidnapped her and I. They kidnapped us. They brought a police officer that threatened to kick my ass. She had on combat boots, steel toes. My little granddaughter was wrapped around my neck all the way to Omaha. They took us in the middle of the night to the children's hospital and left us there with no money or diapers. I had $3 and I think 44 cents in my pocket. They took her to tranquilize her, and when they brought her back, they took her again. She didn't have a hole in her heart or her lung. because we had a very holy medicine man, Marvin Halper, who had thunder spirits, Wakia, they doctored her. She didn't have a hole in her heart and her lung until rural water brought us that water that made us so sick we almost died. But today, because I took her to a cave my grandmother showed me, and inside that cave I went with my cousin and her mom and we sang a ceremony, healing song. And inside this cave, a Wakanoha came, a gourd, and it was astounding. Little bitty gourd sound like a baby rattle came and doctored her. So I know that these caves are really sacred, and I went to that cave since I was a little girl. And I was always taught to keep things very secret because these are things that these people want to exploit. Inside that cave, every year a new buffalo grows, and that tells me that we have hope for the future. That as long as these sacred things keep growing, that we will still be a nation, that we will grow. So I had an experience there when her mom was born, Oyeptehesami. I went to this cave because I had received a buffalo medicine at the Bear's Lodge. And I went to buy what they call a wakia witka, a geode stone. But I didn't have enough money, so I prayed with it. And here what I began to see was a buffalo herd running towards me, and I just kept praying and praying that that's what we want, the buffalo to come back so our people will live. And here all of a sudden in front of me, with that buffalo came through that wall and shook the whole building and scared everyone half to death, and they ran out, they left me in there. So those are things that we cannot. I tried to keep that inside myself, but I thought, well, what if there's other children who are sick? And what if this is one of the places they need to go for healing? So I wanted to share that outside of this cave, although Europeans have written books and said that we didn't have horses, well, my question to them was, why do they have those hobbled stones right there? Those aren't weapons. That's what they hobbled horses with. So it kind of just really threw the whole picture off again, that these historians across these universities and colleges and highest academia, they're going to have to rewrite their books. The horse never left us, it went south. And it came back in the form of a Mustang. So kind of really makes two things happen there. A very sacred cave and, these stones. And one of the themes, like Tanya said, they bring all their people with their degrees and their archaeology and their paleontology and whatever they think they know, but they didn't know any of that. They didn't have archaeology and paleontology until probably the 1870s. There's a man named Silas Pipeonhead who took a man named Copeland into the Badlands and showed him the Thunder Horse. He was the first paleontologist of our people because they knew where these existed. And there's another cave that was there by Red Shirt. It caved in recently. The evidence there showed occupation for way, way before the Bering Strait ever happened. So our evidence as we collect it can never be matched by other academic disciplines. We do have all of these stories. So I wanted to share that in terms of there's more than one cave, not only in the Black Hills, the Wind Cave being our central cave, and all the other caves that are connected give life. And in those caves is water that's fossil water that's there, it's sacred, it's got all the elements and all the things that could cure us from sicknesses. So I wanted to bring that up. And also the fault lines that Tanya is talking about with the removal of all the gases, say in the Wyoming Powder River Basin. What effect is that going to have on these earthquake features? So we have our students out there studying. My granddaughter Taylani Jackson went to UCLA so she could be able to do this kind of testing. We have young people. We're all getting old. I can't walk those mountains as fast as I could. But these young people can. So we need to invest in them, everything that we know, because it's like my grandmother told me when I was 16 years old, and she told me she was going to die now. I was so heartbroken, I wanted to go with her. Because when our old people leave, our teachers, we're lost. And then we say we should have wrote it down, but we have a brain. So we need to somehow make codes where we can keep our knowledge, where we remember it. And most of all, always take your children to the places you went, where you played, do the things that your grandparents did with you. You know, we don't know for sure, we don't have any data right now. I can see how much of this has already destroyed other caves that are in this area around Dewey Burdock. You know, I'm sure there is. We have a very famous cave called the Timberwolf Cave. And this one is really amazing. And Leland reminded me about afraid of his horses. And I looked at the winter count in here. The old man afraid of his horses had 2 timber wolves. That the picture shows these 2 wolves going into battle with him. And they're associated with these caves. So no matter what level we go to, going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, these are really significant to us. You know, we could compare it to people in those hills of Jerusalem or in Italy. They still live in caves, you know. So I want to go occupy a cave, but I don't know who's going to try to evict me, you know. So we need to think about stuff like that for the future. So, anyway, I get really emotional when I talk about my family and what they taught me, because I know that I was their investment, because I'm kind. I'm not a mean person. I'll share with you. So, hope you.
I'd like to add that the things that we speak about these next couple of days are sacred. And they're no different from a man walking on water, or healing lepers, or raising the dead, or feeding a lot of people with fish and bread. These are actual things that we know. And like Viola said, we are the investments of our grandparents that were killed defending the Black Hills, defending a way of life for us. So I say Wopila, and the things that we talk about that I was told by our advisory committee when we started the Star Knowledge Research Project. We asked Marvel, Looking Horse, and his father, Stanley, Edna and Earl Swift-Hawk, and my grandfather, Flying By. And every one of them said the same thing. These are sacred stories, and we do not talk about them casually, like the gentleman here said. We have protocol. The first thing I said was, how do we handle telling stories out of season? So we went up to Greengrass and we asked for permission. And Bashila said, back in 1990, with what you learn, you will defend the people. And they also said, many will try to take it from you. And for protocol, we were told to purify every new moon, take offerings. And even if we just mention stars, we give something tobacco or tobacco ties offerings, because we don't talk about sacred knowledge without tobacco or something to give them. So I've been following these protocols all these years, and I think it's something that our young people in our schools, our teachers should be aware of. If we're going to be talking about stars, then we should be following protocol. Because one of the things that we did not want to happen to the Star Knowledge Research Project was for it to be secularized. And I was told, you're going to be tempted to turn it into a pure science. But remember, these are our sacred stories, and keep them sacred. So while I figure out what to say for the rest of the meetings, let's say, okay, we'll kill it,
Well, how could you, lastly, honey, John, Lonnie, Ishnani, Ahatak Chimakar, Kutakya, Kutakya, we want what you be. That Oglala Sioux and come. He asked me, he said, Ben, in the future, Lakota can thirsty, you grow up big time. How are we going to lead our life if we lose black youth? These legends, these stories, what to relate to those survivors of it. With that, as the Han or Kazaki, old check at the hunter, Nigalu is cocktail away. Nahe Yotam, old Shija. That's the hardest thing to do when you translate Lakota to Koshija. Ta Kulila Ota, the meaning, the significance of that story is not as accurate as speaking. I know Yaka. The lady, he said, Wixie, I remember him saying that, and he just ran down and took him down and said, asked me, lady, alone, walk out here. Walking Siota, Akulilota, and I call Oglala calculate, you don't kill. It's just much of I grew up that way, speaking my native tongue. And Akulila Ota, he can't always say, what comes out from cause to throw in that shoe. If I look at it, I could pick it up real quick. And those are the meaning of our way of life. Oh, he said, along to later. Nobody. Wakaya. I kiayoy, tema kiayoy, hoye ma kiayoy, yani pitelo, ae hoy, taku kechoyoy, ie chetu teloyoy, hoye ma kiayoy, yani pitelo, ae hoy, aho, ah, medaklepi, nenayin, tugna, wakau charshaki nena, akuli la uta, avaluza. They understand the love about our way of life, and they have this knowledge. Many of them beyond. And Tuktugana, Black Hills, we have connection with Black Hills. Tuktugana, Wohokieki, Nana, Ethiopia, Nana, Solyapi, Nana, Wohokieki, Hanta, Koliba Water, Olichaka, Gokeka. They tell us, the Spirit tells us a lot. Washington, Skoja, the Mankocha, the other corruption, this land don't belong to us. As the dominant Chunkalaka, Hiubina, legend said, Yahan, Shija, Nkua. Miniki Nenia, Mianka, Machekia, Yet, or Yunkan Chelsea. Makati, Ukapuhan, Shichahana, Iuhachi, Iya. From the Cheyenne River, you go by Cheyenne River, you will see all the cotton trees dried up. It's not a pleasant sight to see. And you realize all these ranchers, land leases we have on a reservation and use that water for the cattle. And that cattle, how the cattle goes to market and we eat that meat. And there's you said to him, John, Oglala Sioux God. Taco Wakami for him. Things we recognize, acknowledge are sacred. Not sacred anymore. They're contaminated. So I took tell him here at the time, how are we going to manage this food chain? Now, it's all clear. So we're going to here at cash. Waleha, Mihuni Piki. Aku Lila Nana, La Kodia, Dwa Sole Sahanta. Yunana Yakichi Chapo. Oki Chapo, Ognetella. Takuan. Wando Hinashim Nana. Ogna. Kashla Kaho. Oh, Michel Ohan, the fortune. This much that Dona Lakota Berka Hila Poano. Pilona. Oh.
I would like to also add what the gentleman said about contaminated food sources. I think these corporations should be reported to Homeland Security because what they're doing is essentially the same as what the terrorists are doing. Those people overseas who have hatred for us, I'm sure they're happy that these people are doing this. But they also fall under the umbrella of Homeland Security.
Several years ago, when a think about when the Bigfoot ride started. I had a dream about a blue horse coming and telling us what we should do. But in 1982, I was in Apollo in Denver, Colorado, and I don't like to share these things because people make fun of our culture, they make fun of our visions and our dreams, and I'm a mixed blood, so that kind of even puts me in another category. But I had a vision. The vision was a blue horse, and what I seen scared me so bad that I was just shaking. The Black Hills were lifting, and there were canyons forming all around it. And it happened because they took all the cushioning out of the earth, the gas, the oil, the water that holds these very fragile plates in place, because there's many, many cracks around the Black Hills. I was so scared, I was just crying, and the earth was on fire, and even the water was on fire. And I never shared this because I just worked on it. So from that time on, I dedicated my life to teach children star knowledge and why it is sacred. And I have never asked or got mad when I wasn't compensated. One of my twins, Zuya White Bloom, told me, he said, "Mom, do you worry when people don't pay you for teachings?" I said, "No, I got this for free. I got it through love. Our grandparents love us so much. Their love does not have boundaries. And that's how I learned. I don't have a degree. I keep getting F's at my university, at my college, so I decided I'll start my own organization, so I'm the founder of UNCI, like you do know that. Thank you.
Buchi.
Say "Lee" to them. These are our experts still with us, and they embody a lot of our knowledge. And for me, coming from ceremonies, I remember when I went through the Shanti ceremony, which is the womanhood ceremony, and Leola was there, and I remember in our community it wasn't practiced. We always practice those ceremonies. We always go in EP. They're more male, strong. We're male. Our ceremonies are strong on the male side, but on the women's side, you can tell how they purposely kept us from, knowing our women's ceremonies and our women's songs, and pretty soon they were, we're off. So then when it was time for me to do my women's ceremony, then our community got that all together in Oglala, and then they got all the females, the young girls that were of that age and were ready to do their ceremony. And we did that when I was 12. So, and I really want to honor my father, who was my ate. I'm fortunate to have two dads. He's my biological father, and then my stepfather is Gerald One Feather. And so coming out of his home, getting this baby, that's like you have to baby feed. You have to. He taught us a lot about how you implement spiritual law, or you implement the spirituality in our lives. And so with the treaties, how we keep that alive and well. And it's just really, really honored and to be from these people. And I'm going to talk about Uncle Wilmer and lead off into Jeff Parsons, because we have Jeff Parsons here. He is the attorney that's representing Oglala Sioux Tribe in the Dewey Burdock, which is the Edgemont uranium, and our aquifer uranium. And then at noon, we're going to have lunch at the Oyate Center. We're going to feed you buffalo. Hopefully you get a little aligned in that meal. We're cooking some squash we made from the garden, and then drinks and all that good stuff. And then supper, same thing out there. And then tomorrow we'll do the same thing. I know there's a storm coming in, but looks like it's going to be over by Saturday, huh? Looks like a wet storm, and I think we'll be okay. If you have any problems or you want us to help you with anything, you want to ride, we're offering a ride out to the Lakota homes. Okay, Jeff, are you there? Here's Jeff. He has a PowerPoint. I want to give all my love and courage and appreciation to the Western Mining Action Network. Because of the Western Mining, or Jeff, we have a fight against this uranium. And it was Uncle Wilmer that was a former TIPO, and he called Jeff and advocated and got this done. So this is our attorney, pro bono attorney, Jeff Parsons.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Parsons. As Tony said, I'm a lawyer with the Western Mining Action Project. It's a nonprofit law firm based in Colorado. I come from Denver. That's where I was born and raised. Drove up yesterday.
Turn it up a little bit.
The Western Mining Action Project is a nonprofit law firm, so we do all of our legal representation pro bono or for free. We're grant funded generally, so we pay ourselves a salary, and then that allows us not to have to charge our clients. I've been working there for the last 20 years. I've been on this Dewey Burdock project for the last 10. We filed our first papers before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in April of 2010, so I guess it's just shy of 10 years ago. We're still fighting that issue. Just in end of August here in Rapid City, there was a hearing before. They love to make things complicated, but it's called the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board. It's a 3-judge administrative law panel that's assigned to hear this case. Thank you. In the first instance, and then that can be appealed to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is a 5-member panel appointed by the President, confirmed by the U.S. Senate. And so we've been fighting over all these years, and it's still going. The fight right now centers around whether and how to do a cultural resources survey at the site. NRC staff has made the decision that such a survey is not necessary, and obviously the Oglala Sioux Tribe and their allies feel very differently, and that survey is actually essential. And of course our argument is that it's required by law. So that's some of the background on me in that case, but I wanted to sort of take a step back and have more of an overview of sort of the major federal laws at issue and at play in this case. And I'll apologize in advance for some of the density on the slides, but I figured if someone wanted a copy of that, it might be helpful to have more information on there than less. And so it gets a little wordy. I probably should have thrown in a picture or two to make it interesting, but somehow that didn't occur to me till just now. So the major statutes at play here, the National Environmental Policy Act, often referred to as NEPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, and governing uranium processing, which is what in situ leach uranium mining is the Atomic Energy Act. So go ahead. So under the National Environmental Policy Act, it is a federal law applicable to all federal agencies. That includes NRC, although as you'll see, that agency tends to take a different view of how much they're actually bound. The major requirement for NEPA is to take a hard look. That's what you'll hear and see in these NEPA cases. And of course, in the case of Dewey Burdock, having not done a cultural resources survey at the site, how can you take a hard look at something you haven't even investigated? And so that's sort of where that comes in. It's important to note, though, that NEPA is only procedural. So it doesn't make the agencies decide one way or another. It's purely about disclosing the impacts and taking that hard look. And so that you can have the most destructive mine in the world, be legal under NEPA at least, as long as you looked at as long as the agency looked at all the impacts that are going to occur. So while it's I think a very important statute by requiring the agencies to take this hard look, it doesn't have any substantive impact on the project itself. And some of the major components of NEPA, just to give you sort of the outline, the agency has to look at all direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts. And you can see what those are on there. It's well drafted in that respect because it is meant to be holistic. It's meant to be very comprehensive. You often find that agencies will try to compartmentalize different reviews and impact reviews and not look at the big picture, but it really is meant to be comprehensive. You can see the cumulative impacts tend to be some of the more important issues because it reaches beyond just the impact from that project. For instance, at Dewey Burdock, there are abandoned, unreclaimed uranium mines out there on the same property. And there's some, a few years ago, there were EPA investigations into whether those mines were contaminated in the Cheyenne River or otherwise contaminating. And unfortunately, that property is now private land, and PowerTech refused to let the EPA on the site to investigate that contamination. So while EPA closed their investigation formally because they couldn't get access to the site, it's important to know that that investigation has never occurred. And so those are past uranium mines that under NEPA, the agency is supposed to fully review and investigate for what those impacts are when combined with the new proposed uranium mine. And so you, under the statute, that's a required study. Now, in reality, we often don't get quite what we want from that, but the cumulative impacts are a very important component. The regulations that govern federal agencies each agency will have usually their own NEPA regulations, but there are overarching regulations that are created by what's called the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ. It's officed in the White House. It's part of the Executive Office of the President. And it's essentially the White House's Environmental Policy Office. Some presidents make more use of it than others. But they did create a body of regulations that are to apply to all federal agencies. And again, it has some very strong language in there. It talks about making sure you do all these studies before decisions are made, before actions are taken. Now, in the case of Dewey Burdock, they've issued the license to PowerTech for that uranium mine, yet have found in the administrative board that they violated NEPA because they never conducted a proper cultural resources survey. So you can see where, so we've got that argument and we're making it, but you can see how even when you have what appear to be very black and white, pretty clear regulations, sometimes the agencies don't always follow the letter, let alone the spirit of the law, at least in my opinion. The issue here of ensuring professional integrity, I think that's very important. And that essentially means that the agencies have to be thorough, they have to be honest, they have to be technically accurate. And those give the public avenues for challenging or pointing out, commenting on agency analysis and decision making. Go ahead. So those are some of the important. Also critical here is it requires a review of mitigation measures. Those are essentially actions or procedures or steps that the agency can take, or the company or whoever's proposing the project can take to minimize the damage, to minimize the impact. And so they do have to include a mitigation plan. So sometimes, even though it's just procedural, having that mitigation analysis in there will help the agency do a better job of actually protecting whatever resources will be damaged. So again, the statute works well in theory and in practice, or at least in theory. In practice, sometimes it's a different matter. The last point here is an important one because the information necessary to conduct the analysis has to be in the environmental impact statement. And that's the statement that's circulated to the public. It's out for public review. Everyone gets to see it and comment on it. And that's a critical part of NEPA. That's one of the whole points of NEPA, is that the public ought to be able to see this decision making in a transparent way and then comment on it and give feedback. Other agencies as well give feedback to the action agency in order to better the decision. In the Dewey-Burdock proceeding, we're in this fight right now where the Nuclear Regulatory Commission says that they don't have to follow the public review part of NEPA. They can just do it within the confines of this adjudicatory hearing we had. So as long as their witnesses stand in front of this administrative judge and try to explain or create new studies, and they submit new studies on how they're going to do this or that, they don't need to submit it to the public. They don't need to get any other agency review or public review. And we think that's just dead wrong under the law. It's likely that that issue will be continue to be contested and will have to be resolved by the federal courts. At least that's the direction things seem to be heading. Back to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So it is an independent agency. So it's a little different than maybe the Department of Agriculture or the Department of the Interior, that's directly under the president, sort of in a cabinet position. It's an independent agency like FERC or the FCC, for instance. The president does appoint the commissioners that are confirmed by the Senate, but it does sort of operate outside the direct lines of the executive branch. And as a result, NRC takes the position that they're not bound by the Council on Environmental Quality regulations. That's likely to be, again, part of this lawsuit, or this is part of the administrative case right now, and likely will have to be resolved by the federal courts, because NRC says we're just not subject to that. We don't have to comply with those provisions of the CEQ regulations. We disagree. The CEQ regulations are the interpretation of the statute, and they are bound by the statute. And so if that's the interpretation, if Congress gave to the CEQ the discretion and the authority to interpret the statute, then that's what the statute means, so NRC is bound by that. Just just in early August, the DC Circuit, which is sort of the second highest court in the land. There's the U.S. Supreme Court, but then among the circuit courts of appeals, the D.C. Circuit is generally thought to be the sort of second highest. And they just made a ruling in this very important case brought by the United Kiowa Band of Cherokee Indians in Oklahoma. This was over some of these 5G network facilities, where the Federal Communications Commission argued that they don't have to comply with NEPA because they're an independent agency and not subject to the same requirements. And as you can see, the circuit court did not mince words. It says the court owes no deference to the independent agency's interpretations of either the NHPA or NEPA. And so these fights are setting up, I think, very well and very squarely in this Dewey-Burdock case. And it should be very interesting to the extent the Nuclear Regulatory Commission continues to press this hard line given this sort of language from the DC Circuit so recently, what the DC Circuit might rule in an Oglala Sioux Tribe case against the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Moving on to sort of how other agencies implement or don't implement the National Environmental Policy Act, we get to the US EPA. So the EPA is a federal agency just like any other agency in the executive branch. And under the National Environmental Policy Act, there is no exemption for EPA to not comply with NEPA. However, in 1973, there was a very important federal court decision, again, the DC Circuit, holding that, well, because the EPA's whole mission is to protect the environment, and their regulations are structured to essentially do the same things that NEPA does, we're not going to hold them to a strict compliance, formal compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act. We're going to create this doctrine, really this is judicial activism, creating a doctrine, not in the statute at all, but creating a doctrine called functional equivalence. And you can see here it has essentially two elements where a federal agency, and really it's only EPA that's ever qualified or ever had this special treatment, but whether they have to be engaged primarily in an examination of environmental questions, essentially just EPA, and I think this is the critical part, where the substantive and procedural standards ensure full and adequate consideration of environmental issues. So go on, Julie. So that's functional equivalence. So they have to actually give the same consideration to these diverse environmental issues. Now they've taken upon themselves, EPA has, to look at that case from 1973 and formally promulgate regulations exempting themselves with regard to these UIC permits for in situ leach uranium mining. That's the underground injection control program. So EPA has to permit the injection of these chemicals into the aquifer in order to mobilize the uranium. And with regard to the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is the statute that the UIC program is under, they have exempted themselves entirely from the impact provisions of the National Environmental Policy Act. So that's convenient for them. However, it's only based on that functional equivalence. And so go on. So there is again, that orderly consideration of diverse environmental factors in the same manner as required by NEPA. So they can say they're not subject to NEPA, but in effect, functionally, they are still subject to NEPA. So they have in their regulations sort of the counter to that exemption says they must evaluate the cumulative effects. And as you recall from previously, that's a loaded term. That cumulative effects is sort of a term of art. And so it means they have to look at all of the direct, indirect, and all past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions, all of those impacts. And so, for instance, when the EPA publishes their draft documents, which they've recently done, and they say, oh, we don't have to look at this, or we don't have to look at that, I think they're wrong. I think the law requires them to analyze those activities just as they would under NEPA. And so they're using this exemption to try to sidestep some of those reviews, but it's going to, I think, setting up again for going to be a very interesting case. Do they have to look at the cultural resources impacts? Yes, it's a cumulative impact, a cumulative effect on the cultural resources from them permitting these, all these wellheads. I mean, there's going to be hundreds of them out there. So to the extent the NRC isn't going to look at cultural resources and is going to fight that, well, guess what? It rolls right downhill to EPA. And even though they say they're not subject, my view of the law, and I think well supported by the regulations in the federal case law, is that they do have to look at those impacts. And again, it's going to set up, to the extent they continue to push that hard line, it's going to set up for an interesting battle in the administrative appeal process as well as possibly federal court. And so then also at this site we have the Bureau of Land Management at Dewey Burdock. And so this is a federal agency that's directly under the Department of Interior, so they don't get any of these exemptions, they don't get any of these sort of tricks to try to carve themselves out of the National Environmental Policy Act. They are allowed, which I think is reasonable, to the extent another federal agency has done a comprehensive study, BLM would be allowed to adopt that or incorporate that into their own. They wouldn't have to necessarily recreate the wheel, so to speak. They do have an independent duty to make sure all of the laws are complied with. So to the extent, again, you have NRC saying we're not going to do a cultural resources survey, or we're not going to look at where the waste is going. That's one of the issues we have in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission case. We want to know where they're going to process the radioactive waste from the Dewey Burdock mine. And they say, well, we think it's going to go out to White Mesa, uranium mill in Utah, but we're not sure, and it doesn't really matter because we'll just put a condition on the license that says they have to comply with all laws when they dispose of their waste, and that will call it good. Doesn't really work that way. They have to actually look at what the impacts are going to be. There's evidence that the White Mesa mill is leaking, and it's in the White Mesa Ute community in Utah, which is experiencing impacts from this and threats to their groundwater. And so, in our view, that cumulative impact requirement requires, and NEPA requires, that they look at all those impacts. So if, for instance, if NRC isn't going to do it, and EPA says they're not going to do it, it essentially leaves BLM holding the bag. And again, we're just going to keep pursuing this right down the line as far as I'm concerned. Each of these agencies has this duty to comply with the federal law. And the last one to permit, I guess, is going to have the same problem. So they're not going to be able to rely on an analysis from NRC and EPA that's incomplete. And so that's sort of the National Environmental Policy Act world that you see with these uranium mines. Moving on to the National Historic Preservation Act, also mostly, and the courts will say it's purely procedural. So it's hard to get anything but an analysis out of them. But once you get the agencies to do the analysis on the impacts to things like cultural resources, then you can implement other laws, and you can show them that these impacts ought to be minimized and mitigated. And so there is sort of a method to the madness with these procedural statutes. But the two most important sections of the NHPA, or at least the two that show up most in the legal arguments, is Section 106 and Section 110. Section 106 essentially requires consultation with state and tribal historic preservation officers, Indian tribes, and other individuals and organizations interested. So it just requires the agency to reach out when there's a project that might affect important cultural or historic resources. Section 110 is a little, Section 110 is a little more specific. It requires the identification, evaluation, and nomination of historic or cultural resources. And that nomination is to the National Register. That's the National Register of Historic Places. And once something is put on the National Register of Historic Places, then it actually gets substantive protection. So it's a very important process to be able to, from the Oglala Sioux Tribe's perspective, in my view, very important to be able to have this process go forward unimpeded in order to make sure that if there are cultural resources at this site, which all evidence points to, that the tribe have an opportunity to nominate those to the National Register of Historic Places and have them protected. So you can't have the company drilling well holes and waste dumps and such on these cultural resources. And of course, identification is the first critical step in that train. If they aren't going to conduct the Cultural Resources Survey, how are we going to comply with the National Historic Preservation Act? So this is going to apply both to NRC and EPA and BLM. And so NRC can try to duck these issues, but our job is going to be to force them to face up to them. I just wanted to note that similar to the CEQ's role under NEPA, you have the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation under the Historic Preservation Act. And they put together their regulations. And as you can see, they're very easy to read through. Essentially requires that investigate, evaluate, nominate. They include language in here which gives them a little wiggle room, right? A reasonable and good faith effort to identify. So you've got someone like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission saying, we have tried to get this tribe to come along and do the work. We've tried, and they just won't do it. Now what they propose is, let's just open the site, you guys can go wherever you want, and we'll just call it good. Instead of having what we insist on, which is a scientifically organized methodology that's culturally relevant, that includes the ceremonies that Tanya was talking about, that includes reviewing these sites over different seasons, and so the real experts, the people who would be able to identify the cultural resources out on the site and beyond the site on a larger scale can do so. So telling the tribe that they can go out for 2 weeks and come back and that's it, and not pay them to do it and have force them to do it for free, which is essentially what NRC is doing, is not a reasonable and good faith effort, although they contend that it is. So you can see sort of this gets the regulations kind of drill down into the specifics of how the National Historic Preservation Act is supposed to go forward. Again, you see this reasonable and good faith effort sort of going through this. There is specific language that requires consultation with the Indian tribes, but again, a reasonable opportunity to identify its concerns. And so that's where you get into these fights. What's a reasonable opportunity? Failing to provide resources, funding, failing to allow time for a methodology to be developed that's likely to yield meaningful results, we contend that that's not a reasonable opportunity. And then importantly, the consultation occurs on what's called a government-to-government basis. That's not actually in the National Historic Preservation Act. That comes out of an executive order. There was one in '98 and then a second one that replaced it in 2000. But that's what requires this government-to-government consultation. And I think it's critical and it's terrific that the Oglala Sioux Tribe has a specific ordinance on government-to-government consultation. So that puts sort of the, it's still being tested with EPA and NRC, but it does sort of shift the debate a bit and shift the power back to the tribe so that the tribe can define what government-to-government means. What you see these agencies do is they'll send a letter to the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and they'll say, that's government-to-government consultation. We satisfied that duty right there. And then if they don't hear back, they say, well, we gave them a reasonable opportunity, and they didn't go through with it, so we're done here. The courts have increasingly been really slapping agencies down in that regard. Actually, in the Dewey Burdock case, in 2014-15, when we won that issue, one of the exhibits that the NRC put together was, look at this list of all the times we had government-to-government consultation. And about half of them were phone calls that we didn't leave a message because there wasn't a message machine on, but we made the phone call. So that's government-to-government consultation. I mean, it gets to that sort of level of silliness when you see these federal agencies attempt to demonstrate that they've conducted government-to-government. So having that ordinance in the tribal council approved ordinance to be able to put under their noses at every opportunity to say, no, this is what government-to-government consultation means. You have to come to council. You have to meet with the people that the tribal government says you have to meet with. That's what government-to-government means. So I think that's still developing, but I think that's a critical way to sort of put the stop to the sort of games, I would say, that federal agencies sometimes play. Disappointingly, but sometimes play on these sorts of issues. Lastly, the Atomic Energy Act. agreement state program. So this is the program that Wyoming recently went through, and so now Wyoming is approving acid leach uranium, in situ leach uranium, which has never been conducted at a commercial scale in the United States. I think Paul Robinson will talk about it this afternoon or later in this conference. But they've used it in Eastern Europe, and I think what you're likely to hear from Paul is that the results are that it has a much more extensive risk for groundwater contamination. Instead of acid, what they generally use is a basic, they oxygenate the aquifer, and that mobilizes the uranium, but acid will do it in a much more aggressive manner. It's also much harder to clean up, as I understand. Lawyers make bad scientists, so that's the limit I'll go to. But so Wyoming has taken over, South Dakota has not. So that's why we're fighting the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in South Dakota, and in Wyoming you have to go through the state process. So it gives the states control of regulation over all uranium processing. Importantly, though, it does not apply to uranium mining. There was a recent U.S. Supreme Court case decided just this year. It was actually kind of scary to see what this Supreme Court would do. It was actually Justice Gorsuch who wrote the decision in favor of sort of on the so-called environmental side. I think because he maybe from the West, he's from Colorado, he sort of, I think, understood these issues a little better. But that's just my theory. But the state of Virginia had banned all uranium mining, just said we're not going to have it at all. And the company sued and said, well, if you don't have uranium mining, you can't have uranium milling, and because the Atomic Energy Act is the only source of control across the country for uranium milling, you're effectively banning that, and so you can't do that. So it was sort of this twisted argument, and the court came down very forcefully and said, no, states can regulate and even ban if they want to uranium mining, and so it leaves with the states control over the mining. And so that's why at Dewey Burdock, for instance, you're going to have a state mining permit process that will come after all these federal. You can see this long train of hearings and legal processes that PowerTech still has to go through. So we're only 10 years in on that fight, so stay tuned. But thankfully, one more, and just to be clear, so in situ recovery, or in situ, they call it in situ recovery, I think because leach sort of offended their sensibilities. So they like to call it in situ recovery. I still call it in situ leach because I think it has a more vivid description. But it's considered both mining and processing. And so it's this hybrid where it's mining. Most of the state's mining laws will say if anytime you remove a mineral from its natural place, it's mining. And then processing is anytime you concentrate the uranium. And so this in situ leach process effectively does both at the same time. And so it's subject to both the state mining laws and federal mining laws, to the extent it's on federal land, as well as the Atomic Energy Act uranium processing regulation. And so this is the Atomic Energy Act. So it does give the state the control over the regulation of the uranium processing, but under conditions. It must meet minimum federal substantive and procedural public hearing standards. And so, yes, Wyoming gets to control, but only to the extent that they have an equivalent program to what would go under the federal law. So they can't just, clear the slate essentially and have these things go through without complying with the same types of environmental protection and procedural protections that apply at the federal law. Now, getting them to enforce that is another matter, as we find. For instance, in Colorado, there was a new uranium mill proposed, first new uranium mill in some 35 years proposed in Colorado. And Colorado just kept botching the permitting. First they said, oh, we don't have to give you a hearing at all. And, well, the federal government requires a hearing, so the Atomic Energy Act requires a hearing, so you have to give us a hearing. So that went to court, back down, because they failed to give us a hearing. And then they messed the hearing up, and they didn't apply the same standards that the federal government would apply. And so we shot that down and went back again. and the company is now pulled out. So that mill is sort of died on the vine. But it shows that you have to be willing to sometimes go into state court to fight these battles, because it's a state matter, a state issue. And there may be some theories that allow you to get into a federal court. I think those haven't been fully explored, but there's always room to sort of strategize. So there are 39 agreement states. So most states have this authority. Most of the ones that don't actually are in the West. Montana, I think, and of course South Dakota. That's why we're in front of the NRC. And so this is sort of just the citations for what those protections have to be. So I think it's important to note that states must have regulations which are equivalent or more stringent. And so it's perfectly fine for a state to take jurisdiction over the Atomic Energy Act program and then put harsher or more strict, better protections, I guess I'd say, better groundwater protections in place than the federal government has. So the federal government regulations are a floor, not a ceiling. And so in Colorado, we've done that. We've put in additional groundwater protections. Mostly along the lines of forcing the mining companies, once they're done injecting chemicals into the aquifer, to restore the aquifer to pre-mining conditions. Of course, that's what the companies promise they'll do, but then somehow once you put it in the state law, they're hard to locate anymore in your state. The companies are hard to find. That's what happened with PowerTech. They promised and promised all these people who were using the same aquifer that they wanted to drill into, that they would restore their water back to pre-mining conditions. And we said, okay, great, let's just write that down and enact it into state law. And that's when they, sort of abandoned. They haven't formally said in public that they've abandoned the project, but it's been over 10 years and there have been zero activity down there, no permitting activity, no anything. So one might assume that that was part of the calculation. And it's disappointing because they really were promising all these people that they were going to restore the aquifer to its pre-mining condition. And then once that was law, apparently it was a problem for them. So that's important to know. You can have stricter requirements in an agreement state. And then these are some of the requirements that an agreement state must have. You must see, so it sort of is like a NEPA equivalent, I guess. It has to be, you have to have a written analysis on the impact of the license, including impacts to public health, impacts to water. You have to consider alternatives and look at long-term impacts. So there's, that's sort of the floor. You can do better than that in an agreement state, but you can, what this means is if an agreement state fails to do these things, then their licensing process is de facto illegal. It is not meeting the minimum standards of the Atomic Energy Act, therefore it's not a lawful process. And of course, the problem is that once the agreement status is approved, both the state and the NRC will argue that NEPA and NHPA no longer apply. And so the real gap in an agreement state process is, like we're dealing with at Dewey-Burdock, is this cultural resources analysis. If there are no state laws that require any kind of consultation or any kind of protection for cultural resources, and again, this is private land in Wyoming, as I understand. So it's federal land, then you get the Federal Land Management Agency on the hook, so to speak. But if it's private land and there's no state equivalent law on like a National Historic Preservation Act kind of thing, those cultural resources do not get protected. And so that's a problem, obviously. There may be some theories to explore on that in terms of if, it says that the state program has to be the equivalent of the federal program. Well, does that include the historic preservation protections? That's a possible argument. I don't think that's ever been brought to court. So we don't have any sort of conclusive, at least not that I'm aware of. And of course, again, if it's on federal lands, then you've got those federal land management agencies having to comply with all those laws. And I think that's it. So sorry for the long description, but I just wanted to sort of give that overview, sort of the landscape of the federal laws that we're looking at and how those apply, particularly to an in-situ leach uranium mine. I'm happy to begin a discussion or answer any questions or otherwise. Reno, go ahead.
Hey, you know, that cleared up a lot with me with the state regulations with the federal regulations. Because right now, this past weekend, there was a public hearing in Hot Springs over EPA underground injection control. Comments were given, but that Dewey Burdock area it is state, and, but the underground injection control is with EPA, federal, and there was strong, good input. But my question is, whenever the tribes you have issues with, like with EPA, and their decision is made, and it doesn't go in the favor of the tribes, like with NADA, what is the next step? Is it an appeal process for a court case, or what is the appeal process?
For EPA?
Yeah.
So the EPA, any decision, any underground injection control decision is appealable up to what's called the Environmental Appeals Board. It's essentially a court within EPA that you can appeal things to. And so they will decide whether to hear your case. They're not required to hear your case, regardless of how good it is. They'll look at it, decide whether to hear it or not, and then maybe ask for additional briefing or more evidence or even oral argument in DC if they want. Then they'll issue their decision, and then that decision is then appealable up to the Circuit Court of Appeals, similar to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission process, effectively. The nice thing about the EPA process, though, is even if they've issued the permit, once you appeal, just filing the appeal automatically stays the permit. So they can't do anything at all while that case is still pending before the Environmental Appeals Board. So unlike the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where we had this big fight and actually did go to the DC Circuit over whether they could keep this license in place in the face of violations, and the answer was possibly. Courts love to give you unclear answers, but it was a win, I think, for the tribe. It did shut down NRC's argument that the tribe had to show irreparable harm before they could get that decision stayed. But because of all these other permits that the company did not have, the court said, well, you know, you can leave the license in place as long as nothing's going to happen, as long as it's just on paper. So I'm still disappointed in that, but it was, I think, important to clarify that. But with EPA, that decision is completely stayed and non-effective until that appeal is heard. I have one more over here, and then I'll move this side.
Well, I'm Jeff. Thank you. Leland Little Dog. I'd like to make some comments about the nation-to-nation relationship that we have. And we'll go outside the box, and I thank you for talking about federal law. But today we know that we are recognized at the UN. And one concern that I have is who is representing us as government to government. And we all know that this IRA from the government came from the people that were incompetent in 1906. They severed trust relationship, trust status, and it came back in 1934 as the IRA government to replace a consensus-based Lakota government. And if we're gonna start using all the things we have that we can use, we should start looking at indigenous courts. Because we can file something at the high end, but we know that it takes a long time for stuff to get there. And we should be doing what Rudy James did, is indigenous courts. Example is British Columbia, 2 teenage girls blocking the logging road, arrested, we're gonna get sent to a women's prison. Rudy James assembled the village elders as the jury, asked them if they did anything wrong after he read the charges, and the village elders, as the jury, said no. They were oral tradition people, they transcribed it, videoed it, they forwarded it to the Crown in England, and they honored it, and they sent it back to Canada all the way down to the ministry, down at RCMP. And the 2 girls were released on the basis of that indigenous court held prior to Canadian court. And I think what we should be doing is having indigenous courts here where we decide based on this unwritten code of the UN. It's called the Non-Negotiable Rights of Women and Children. And that's what every UN judge looks at. And it's as simple, is this, and you fill in the blank, project in the best future interest of the women and children? And it's a simple yes or no. So one thing that we could do is have our indigenous courts, our findings forwarded to either the Supreme Court and the UN courts, because one question that I ask is, are we state citizens to be participating in a state court? I mean, in the Supreme Courts, we all know how we get treated there. And the other concern that I have is our tribal governments. As we know, they don't have recognition at the UN level. 2 years ago at the Permanent Forum, they were informed that if you're IRA-based, you're not recognized here. You're only recognized for being illegal and sources of poverty. And I don't know how much of our people are aware of that. When we put our lives on the line, like our people did up at North Dakota, to be represented by these IRA governments, which are basically powerless and not recognized at the UN. And one of the things that our own government is doing, and I'm sure it happens at every land base, is the tribes themselves are contaminating our water. These IRA governments. At Rosebud, we went from, I think, 5 center pivots to like over 20 within 5 or 10 years, just recently. And that's putting 3 layers, putting a fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide in the ground every year, going into our groundwater. And much like what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission says, we don't have to abide by those. And we find that our tribal governments are playing the same game. They're saying we have the sovereignty not to go by federal law. In the case of prairie dog poisoning, the state told these IRA governments that are managing the land that you can use this more destructive form of prairie dog poison instead of the safer one. But they were also told you have the sovereignty not to use the safe one, you can still use the harsh one. So I think it's time for us to, as a people, to start thinking about what vehicle we want to represent us at the international level. Because even the International Indian Treaty Council recently has moved without consent to support these IRA governments instead of the treaty government, the Lakota government, which is what started it all in 1975 after the occupation. So I think tribal governments should be held just as accountable for contamination of our resources as an agency or a private corporation. Mohan, that's what I want to say. Thank you.
For all of you here, my name is Regina Brave. I'm from the Pine Ridge Reservation, and my whole spiel here is the treaty, the 1868 treaty, which was ratified by Congress. And I want to read an article that came out in the Congressional Record. And every time we do something in the past, even though we have oral history, we have to have some kind of proof in writing about who we are and where we come from. Well, we all know who course, it's, anyway, this is an article I wrote in, letter to the editor in Rapid City Journal, which was never published. And it has to do with the uranium mining in the Black Hills in the 40s, where people started getting cancer. But I offer the following in the Congressional Record Proceedings and Debates of the 107th Congress, Second Session, Volume 248, 148, number 125, Treaty Tribes Located in the State of South Dakota. And I will quote Mr. Tim Johnson. The following are excerpts from the Congressional Record. Paragraph 3, Indian treaties stand on essentially the same footing as treaties with foreign nations. Because they are made pursuant to the Constitution, they take precedence over any conflicting state laws by reason of the Supremacy Clause. U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Section 2. Worcester versus Georgia, 31 U.S. Has these numbers. They are also the exclusive prerogative of the federal government. Paragraph 7. Federally recognized Indian tribes in South Dakota signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie with the desire to declare peace and thereby perpetuate a nation-to-nation relationship with the federal government. The common misperception that most tribes have entered into treaties with the United States serves as a great injustice to tribes who have entered into such formal and solemn agreements. In 1890, there were 162 established tribes. 56 of those were established by executive order, 6 by executive order under the authority of Congress, 1 by unratified treaty, and 51 by treaty or agreement. The treaty establishing the South Dakota tribes is a contract negotiated between sovereign nations relating to peace and alliance, formally acknowledged by the signatories of the nations. The United States entered into such agreement because they desired peace and cessions of land from the Sioux tribes, and in return they made promises that must be upheld. In conclusion, it is appropriate to recognize the special status of the treaty tribes located in South Dakota. The Fort Laramie Treaty was signed on April 29, 1868, and it has a name and it was ratified on February 16, 1869, proclaimed on February 29, 1869. By proclamation as a nation-to-nation peace treaty, then the state of South Dakota is in violation of that treaty when it became a state 20 years after, in 1889. And I hold the state of South Dakota in violation of the Constitution, Article 6, Section 2, when that treaty was made in pursuant. And there's a lot of documentation that I have written from in the Constitution for people like us, okay? And I also have been collecting on this in support of our treaty, because the state has no jurisdiction at all within treaty territory. But when they come to try to make a nation-to-nation or a government-to-government issues on these different mines that we're opposing, then they're called consultations. But Oglala Sioux Tribe is not a nation. It is only a band of the great Sioux Nation we call Uchechi. And yet, when we come together, we're not allowed to come together as a nation, because in 1876, when we won the war against the 7th Cavalry that was sent, we won. That was the second war that we won against the United States, and yet it's not in the history books. And when we came back to our different areas where we were protecting our treaty homeland, then soldiers were waiting and reservations were created. We've been prisoners of war for 143 years. And I'm not on until tomorrow, but I needed to bring that up since Mr. Parsons here has been helping our people here. It was a against all the mining that's been happening, whether it's the gold or Dewey Burdock. And I want to bring that up too. I attended a meeting here in, I think it was in 2012, the geographic or meeting that they were having over here. Geologists were having a meeting, and they had gone into that Burdock area in, I can't remember that time when the Oglala Sioux Tribe filed against Dewey Burdock and closed down the mine. It was in 2010. And what was it, 2010? And they went in and they brought up all this, they went in with a pipe over a drill and brought up all the soil that was under the earth. And they recommended to the representatives of Dewey Burdock at that time, at that meeting here in Rapid City, and told them that it was unsafe to ever go back in there because of the shale and because of the soil that was underneath. It's really vulnerable to leakage and so forth, that they recommended that they not attempt to make any attempt to go back in. But see, like you said, these are written on paper, and just like the Bible, put it in writing and put it on your shelf and forget about it. And this is exactly what happened in this situation. But that's where that this book that's sitting over here comes from. You know, Tanya has one, and I collected a whole pile of them and passed them out to, I figured, people who would look at that book. And this is it. And you can get one from here at the School of Mines, with water tables here in the state of South Dakota that will be affected. And you look into it, and yeah, it's a lot of reading to do, but it's take the time to do it and go through the maps, because our people here in the state of South Dakota, and it only talks about the Black Hills, and what Tanya and them have been working on is the Oglala, then the mine, that's a group of aquifers that feed for that the people utilize here in the Black Hills area. So we're talking about the Black Hills area, but we don't know whether those aquifers are actually connected and help each other out when they're pushing water out. And my thing tomorrow is the headwaters. The headwaters are the ones that are pushed out from the aquifers that form the rivers and streams and springs that exist. And we forget, when we start talking about protecting the land and water, we forget that I would say maybe 70% of the foods come from this whole area where these aquifers feed water to the ranchers and farmers. And when the food starts disappearing off your shelves, then you'll know and realize that what we're here talking about when we are against the mines is that we are fighting for survival of our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Auntie Gina. Anybody have any? Oh, here you go. One more question for Jeff. We're going to have lunch at noon again.
Good morning, Jeff. I had a question about within our contentions about the historical invasion. I have the record. I've been studying battle sites, and on July 14th, 1876, on Warbonnet Creek, there was an engagement with settlers invading the Black Hills. And I think those are really important, because what we need to show is a long history of invasion, that although there was a treaty made, the army wasn't protecting us. They were allowing settlers to come into the territory to do exploration. And if you remember when Custer's expedition came, their guides got them lost in the Black Hills, so they were stuck up at Preschla for about a week or so. They didn't know the routes. And that was Ludlow, the geologist, who later went into Colorado. And so Ludlow went all over. There's Ludlow, Colorado, Ludlow, Nevada, Ludlow, California. It was all over. But I think these are really important to show that this treaty was broken, so therefore our people were fighting. But later on in that year, after the Little Bighorn, there's engagements on Cedar Creek, which is in Wyoming. There's another engagement up in Bark Creek, December 7th, Ash Creek, December 18th. And I was just wondering if those could be in our historical files, because we've been finding this a very long time. And for our historical record, I'm sure that we still have to go back down there and look for these sites, because, you know, every time we lost people, we have to go back there and pray. That's on our cultural, spiritual. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thanks.
Okay, what I want to say about that peace treaty too is that there was a question raised about the peace treaty, and one of our so-called paper chiefs, sitting there twiddling his thumbs, said, "Oh, it's a peace treaty." You know, well, we have the right to defend ourselves, and we're doing it in a spiritual manner. We have the language, we have the technology, we have the education, and we're learning how to use them, and we are still at war. And this is the war that has been going on for, like he said, he's been on the job for 10 years. Look at the medicine wheel, we're all together in this. The red, yellow, black, and white, in our own indigenous countries. So understand that we may have signed a peace treaty, yes, we kept it, but we have a right to defend ourselves.
Thank you, but I'd also like to add on to what Leola said about the battle sites and treaty violations. The DAPL camp, any resistance to oil pipelines, any kind of mining, those should be included in these battles that we have. These are contemporary battles, and after the 1868 treaty was signed, government appropriated money for the U.S. cavalry to protect us because we had the nation to nation. And instead, that money that was appropriated, paid for by taxpayers, was used to fund the army coming in here. And we see the same thing happen again up at DAPL, where Homeland Security money was used against the people that had the nation to nation, not against the invaders. So twice now that idea has been violated by the U.S. government. Thank you.
Okay, I guess where we want to take this and turn it, we open the floor for Jeff to get some questions and input. Now we kind of want to go into the strategy before lunch, and we could kind of work with this during lunch. We're going to go out to Lakota Homes and eat at the Wiyati Center. And so from your standpoint, you as a you know, an individual sitting there, whatever your capacity is, we need to think of strategy. You know, what can we do? We have a lot of great minds here, and so just your idea of how we can strategize to work with Jeff and our tribal council members that are here. Thank you for being here. Which is the government to government. It has to come from tribal council. You know, the reason that we're the tribe that has that set up, and you know, we wish the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Board, some of the chairmans were here listening in, trying to help strategize, but we have really good people here, so we're going to go with that. And how can we become stronger? You know, as these uranium mines come in, we're dealing with it on the South Dakota side, but on the Wyoming side, can you pull up that map again, Julie? On the Wyoming side, again, it's state jurisdiction, state approved, and that's where our headwaters are sitting. Zoom in on it, please, so they can see it. Can everybody see that map? Move it over a little bit, if you can. And so we're talking about Cheyenne River headwaters are the same company that is, you know, this Crow Butte mine. This is what's impacting Rosebud, Pine Ridge, right here, Crow Butte. And then what Jeff is representing is the Dewey Burdock and Oglala Sioux Tribe case. And then over here, this is all state. The state of Wyoming eliminated the NRC. But what's interesting, right? Now let's look at this and let's take a look at the severity of this. So where these headwaters like Cheyenne River would come out over here by this Converse County. And we're dealing with some of those same uranium companies that want to mine Crow Butte. So this Highland, Smith Ranch, Alaman, Ross, these are all by Casper. And then you go south in, and Gas Hills is our relatives over there, the Rapos. And then down here to Sheep Mountain. So Little Missouri, and I want to say Yellowstone, Balfouche River, they're all headwaters that come out of here. Those are those aquifers. Now over here we have the Black Hills aquifers, which are Dewey Burdock, and then on this side, that acid leach mine is mined in Madison. So when we look at that, those aquifers, they're being impacted. So we, sitting here, want to strategize and give ideas how we can deal with this. So, does anybody have any ideas? Should we start off with Jeff?
Well, certainly paying close attention to the Wyoming regulatory process. There are some folks in Wyoming, there's a group called the Powder River Basin Resources Council that's up in the Sheridan. They have an active sort of watchdog campaign. Coordinating better with them would certainly be high on the list. They have a really excellent lawyer, Shannon Anderson, who's challenged some of the both coal mining issues and uranium mining issues up there. And I think drawing on some of their expertise in terms of the Wyoming process and Wyoming laws would be one way to. What I do find in these sort of issues is that the earlier you engage, the better off you are. So anytime you sort of have to be reacting to a decision that's already been made, you're sort of already behind the ball a little bit. And so having a sort of a more aggressive effort to keep track of the Wyoming. I mean, all of those, the red ones are existing and the green ones are proposed, but inevitably all of the existing ones will be coming in for amendments to their license to allow for weakened groundwater protections. That's how they say they restore an aquifer, is they don't actually restore the aquifer, they just weaken the standards until they don't have to do anything anymore. The other thing that happens, and Dr. Legary can speak to this, I'm sure, is that they stop monitoring too early. And so what they do is they run the flushes or run the treatment that they do, and you see the levels of the contaminants drop. But then they say, okay, we met whatever standard it is, and they pull out. And then if you keep monitoring, you see over time those go back up. And so all of the existing mines will have to come back in for amendments to their licenses for groundwater remediation. And all of the proposed mines obviously will have to get permitting, but then they too will come in. So I think, for instance, the Lance project that was permitted for acid leach, what they're doing in that case is allowing them to go into one well field to start. and they do one well field, and then there's going to have to be a demonstration that they're able to both control that acid and that they're going to be able to restore it before they're going to be allowed to go on to the next one. So obviously that's a critical opportunity to be there to make sure that process has sufficient rigor, legally and scientifically, that they can't just sort of blow through that. And that's going to be important. My read of the current situation is that permit has been issued. So for that first well field, there's not a whole lot I can think of legally anyway that can be done. That is to say, in the administrative process or the court process that can be done. But those license amendments are going to be, every one of those is an opportunity. And if they're not following those minimum federal standards, I mean, there's, not to mention any of the requirements that are existing in the Wyoming state law, all those are opportunities to sort of hold their feet to the fire, so to speak, and ensure compliance. And if they can't restore those aquifers, they shouldn't be able to move on to any other sites. So those would be some opportunities sort of coming down the pike to at least get engaged. And whether it's the tribal government or others, I mean, it doesn't have to be the tribal government to engage. All you need is someone who has what they call standing, legal standing, which is essentially you're going to be adversely affected. The Powder River Basin folks can help with that because they know all the people who, and have contact with people in those areas, but you know, the issues with the treaties, I think those, you know, would serve in those capacities as well. I mean, I think that's a solid basis to argue, and certainly anyone who, you know, if there's any public land around there, really standing, all you have to do is show that you fish the river, or you know, camp out there, or you hike, or anything else. You go out there and sit and enjoy nature. That's all you need, as long as it's you have an argument that's going to be adversely affected. So that's one, you know, thought, is to engage more heavily in those permanent amendments.
Okay, we'll go to the next question here, but so from that strata mine that we just showed you, the company actually, I guess, went out of their way to appropriate us, and it's actually called the Little Missouri Headwaters Project. So this is from their actual mine, and they talk about how important the little headwaters, the Little Missouri headwaters, are important to us, and how many people gone there. There's so much, and they're partnered with the NRC to facilitate this webpage. So if we actually return to that Little Missouri headwaters area where this acid leach is happening, we're going to be exposed to radiation. You know, that doesn't say that in there, but that's what's happening. So anyway, here you go, Carla. This is Carla.
Hi, my name is Carla Marshall. I am a enrolled member of Oglala Sioux Tribe and relatives down in Oglala. No relatives, no. So one of the issues that I work with, part-time volunteer with Black Hills Clean Water Alliance, a member of Black Hills Clean Water Alliance, board member, and also a steering committee member of the Western Mining Action Network. And now I'm working at the Dakota Rural Action, so another hat on. But one of the things that we found out when F3 Gold came to the Black Hills up here for gold mining exploration, we had a guy out of Deadwood. He used the coordinates from BLM to remap what they were sending us. And to come find out that some of that area was showing that it was in the Black Elk Wilderness area, which is a protected area. The reporter got a hold of BLM and said, you know, why are you guys in this Black Elk Wilderness area? And they said, oh, no, we're not supposed to be there. That was a clerical error. So they had you know, you could do like the southwest quarter of the northwest section, that type. So they did have a W where S was supposed to be or something. So BLM did admit that that was their error. So I mentioned to Lilius, I was like, you know what, we need to put out a forensic audit on BLM. So if we do a forensic audit on BLM, saying you need to go back into your records all the way back to make sure that all your records are accurate, because there is clerical errors. And I also was thinking about the Cobell cases, because that's what it was about, is, you know, all their leases for natural resources and stuff were being fudged, I guess. So Jeff, do you think that would be a viable way to slow down these projects if there was or if there's a way that we could get in there and demand that there's a forensic audit on BLM and Park Service lands too? So that's kind of my question, you know, what I'd like to kind of bring to mention anyway. Thank you.
I think I have to give that a little more thought. If there were just some errors in the entering into the database, for instance, it wouldn't necessarily affect the claims on the ground. I mean, those claims have to be physically staked on the ground as well, and so it wouldn't change the staking of the claims. And if they ever proposed anything actually in a wilderness, then that would be pretty easy to defend, pretty easy to fight through the agency legal process. And so I'm trying to think of how that would slow things down. It would consume BLM's time, which they could be doing other things, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of how it would. I'll give some more thought to how that might, give us a better angle. As far as the Cobell case, I think what drove that was the fact that it was, hundreds of millions at least dollars that were in damages, and so I think I'm trying to also think of what sort of our damages would be for them misentering, claim notices. It could be a pervasive problem, but even so, I'm just not sure what the damages would be. So I guess
Well,
it just
it happened here, BLM did admit that, they said, thank you for bringing that to our attention, we're sorry, and so they did, we were able to track that on the map, but it's like, how many more have they done this to,
Inevitably, there's more errors in there. I
Yeah.
agree with you.
Well, you're done.
Next question.
Thank you, Jeff. I would like to add that we should be using all the rights that we have. Right now, we're talking about, we're in the box of federal Indian law. It's the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, Civil Rights, etc. But below that, we have treaty rights, both domestic and international. And then below that, so we should have been able to get relief up at the top. But if we can't, then we can move down to the treaty level. If we can't get relief there, then we should move down to human rights level. So there's probably about 12 human rights instruments that are applicable to everything that's going on here. And it's a way to prevent another war from breaking out. We're peaceful about everything. And below the human rights, holding everything up is inherent right. So that's what I was talking about. Our own courts begin at inherent right level, and then we move up through human rights, through treaty rights, and then these findings forwarded to the United States government. Thank you.
You're certainly right that we're playing on their field, so that's never-ending frustration for me.
Hello, I like Leland's statement earlier. My name is Harold Salway. I'm the Director for Natural Resources Program in Pine Ridge. In 1990, Uncle Oliver, Royal Bull Bear, Isaac Whiteface, a bunch of old men came together. I'm a left-haired by birth. I come from Crazy Horses. close by community. That's who I am. And again, my dad's mom comes from Red Club. For the record, they made me a traditional headman. So I like Leland's statement in that the treaty states treaty identifies custom law, and based on custom law, I think it would be a good approach to put a position paper based on the treaty and declare as a traditional sovereign nation we oppose any and all violations based on the treaty. And the Home Rule states and identifies and acknowledges our right to assess what's proper for us based on our traditional mores, norms and mores as a community, and that violates all of the blessings Mother Nature gives us, and what this mining, how detrimental and damaging it is to us as a nation. As they explore and start extracting the uranium, it permeates the soil, the water, air, but it also gets into the vegetation, which has a very deleterious negative impact in the future and the lifestyle and lifeways of everybody, all color, all life. And putting a position paper in declaring that a violation of the treaty, and demand the federal government address it, acknowledge and address it in proper context. Because the women represent water, that's very important. Many years ago when I fasted, in my vision, I had a woman walking in the bottom of a stream. And I really like telling this in Lakota. I'm a fluent speaker, but it has such great meaning. When I asked my Hunka father, Dawson Horse, he explained it to me, which I can tell in a different forum, but not here. But that women are representative of the water, and it's very important. And taken into context, the men represent the rock. So because of what the uranium mining does and how negative it is, it has such an impact on our totality as a traditional lifeway, as we are connected to Mother Earth and everything that she gives and provides for us. So putting a position paper like that in a treaty context is really important. I think that's something that we, the men, have to start standing up and and strengthening that approach, and the women too, because women, the worldly presence of women in water is very vital. I have a lot more to offer and a lot more to state, but I'm here as a natural resource director, so I'm here in a domestic capacity, so I apologize. Thank you.
Okay, back to strategy. I wish maybe we'll work through this through lunch and let people introduce themselves, because I know we have a lot of great people here. But strategy, it's very fortunate we get an attorney in front of us, so we need to think of what we could do to help this. And one thing that I learned, was that when these things are approaching us, we don't have to go wandering around looking for answers. We go to the people that this already impacted. We have relatives from Navajo Nation that dealt with uranium down there. I mean, we work with them on a basis with radiation monitors. They had with no nukes out of New York, and we have to keep track of these. We have to get readings, radiation, and start keeping up with this. It's like it's a gauge, and it's like a temperature. You need to keep track of temperature. Now we need these Geiger counters to keep track of what radiation we're being exposed to, because it's coming through the ground, it's coming in the air, and
regardless of an agency or a scientist that wants to promote this, that person is not gonna come in front of you and protect you from that. So our fight has to be stronger. You know, we need to, whatever it is that we need to do right now, you know, we need to think of ideas to strategize. So from the Oneida Nation and from Wisconsin, what I learned from them, because one of their tribal members married the big millionaire Buffett, what's his name? Warren Buffett. So then he sponsored their tribe, and they redid their whole constitution. That's why we're pushing this constitution thing, because we want our constitution to be strong, so that when they on purposely contaminate us, they're violating our constitutional rights. And we have a right to write that up however we want to. That's our constitution. So that's why I support that constitution on that. And the other part of it is we have our own water codes. You know, you don't think about your water code as being your sovereignty. You don't think about it like that. You think just it's a document that people are keeping track of, and there's a job, you know, it's just there. But we can't think of it like that. We need to think about these things on a sovereign nation, so that when we have a flyer out here and it's talking about those isotopes, those uranium isotopes, and when you test them, you can find out which isotope it is. And there's man-made, there's various types of man-made or just natural isotopes. And then there's this man-made isotope that is made from these uranium mines, where they're actually processing it there. It's going back into the aquifer, and then it's ending up in our body. We don't have that yet. But that's something with our water resources, our tribe, that we need to strengthen, that TIPO code can ban those man-made isotopes in our water, and they're violating our sovereignty. You know, if there are levels in our constitution, imagine what that might look like. But we need to think of that language in that constitution, that these waters that go by this nation are maybe even, you know, where the combat with registering some of these sites as sacred site, you know, that's something that we need to look at as a river. Something they do across the world is they give a river human rights. That river has human rights. So these aquifers, where these headwaters are coming out of, you know, our main river sources, those are human rights. How do we put that in our tribal codes? How do we put those in our, you know, we start things with resolutions. And how do we push this? You know, either start it from the district, or you go to your committee. And the ones that are in charge of this, our water and our natural resources, is the land committee. So every Monday, whether it's at 10 or 1, me and Julie are in there, huh, Julie? We're trying to advocate for something. But we need that in every tribal government. Those water codes have to ban those elements, the contamination. Our constitution needs to say something about our rivers having, you know, being a human form, or whatever it is. You know, we need to go back to our drawing board and figure out what we need to do. But definitely, because it's government to government, and they try to, you know, you can see it, how they manipulate. They'll just go to that government to government, or sometimes the tribe will designate a person. But we need to keep our tribal council on board, so that we're monitoring what's happening. Maybe that's what they call them, loose cannons. You know, this has already been done before with these tribes that do oil and gas drilling, oil and gas fracking. They've already done this. So they'll take that loose cannon, the one that wants to promote the contamination, and have that as their token Indian. That's why we have that government to government in place, so that when these hearings come up, they're not going. That's their style. Divide and conquer. They're going to isolate 1 or 2 out of there. Here's some money. here you go, but we all suffer from that because wherever that project is, it's gonna become radioactive, so then when we return there, we're like that, Little Missouri, we wanna return there. It's, my grandma told me stories about that place, and it was like a Galapagos, Galapagos, what is it? Galapagos, that island. These places were rare places. And now, look at it. So now, whatever it is, definitely need to push our water codes to ban these. We're add to that constitutional reform so that our waters are protected. Banning those uranium mines in some of those topics, which has never been done before. But we are the people that do that. I'm happy and I'm grateful to come from the people. When we went down to recently just Tar Creek in Oklahoma, which is up, you think about Oklahoma, it's the top, so that would be another northeastern corner. And those tribes, when they came for them to mine back in the 40s or 50s, to mine whatever land they lived on, they actually kind of condemned them. And if they weren't illiterate, or they were illiterate, or they didn't have a 6th grade education, then they were sought as, they took their rights away, and then they decided for them to let that oil and gas come in. So there's a lot of history that we need to keep track of and pay attention to, so that when we need this, we need to tend to this. Headwaters, this was in the treaties, how do we tend to that? So, again, what time is it now?
2 minutes to be.
Noon? Okay. All right, anybody want to add anything before we leave? Okay, we got a couple hands here. Can you be real quick with your question?
So my name is Shantae. I'm from the Oglala Sioux Tribe. I'm actually born and raised here in Rapid City. I was actually in Washington State trying to earn my degree in environmental science, but I was studying salmon, so I don't really know too much on the water codes or water rights, but I do know how greatly the water is important to the environment and the species. So my thing is, my fiance is from Alaska, so what I've been learning over the past weeks with his people in Alaska, how the water is being impacted and greatly disturbed by their oil and the environment up there, that with the water, how you're saying that we have to go on all level of the rights. The water, we're always saying water is life, and water really is alive. There's living organisms inside the water that grow once it freezes. And I don't know too much, on that side of that side of the science part. I just know the environmental side. But if you could do something and look them into that, because I know that once this organism grows, then another species comes in and needs to thrive off that. And then the Alaskan people, it's a chain. So I do know that we need to hit all areas of this in order to stop these pipelines. So all organisms, all species, as well as humans, especially our water. And so this is why I'm hoping that we end up going to Alaska by Christmas, so that I can really, really see how greatly impacted the Alaskans are being devastated by the water and how things change. But otherwise, if we can, just see how the water really is alive, but not just, but yeah.
Thank you. Anybody have any real quick, short questions for Jeff? We need to get on with our lunch. We'll have a speaker over there, speaker system, so we can keep asking questions.
Very quickly, somebody mentioned human rights. There's all kinds of rights there. As we know, these IRA governments are federal representative governments, and the U.S. government has adopted most of the human rights instruments, but they didn't ratify them because the UN attorney told me in 2000 that he said they know that if they ratify the human rights instruments, the tribes are going to take the U.S. to court. And so what we need to do is to get Manchal Omanichia to thoroughly understand these human rights laws, and we adopt and ratify them, not depend on this IRA government that has no recognition of the UN. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Cheryl Angel. I'm Sinchang Lakota. On my mom's side, on my father's side, he's Pine Ridge, and his grandfather comes from Mexico, south of the border. So I travel quite a bit. I've been visiting tribal nations on a few continents. All of them are fighting. They're using their ancestral knowledge and their sovereign economies and their prophecies. That's what they're using to stop the activities. In Ecuador, they're battling right now today in the streets. And in several communities, they have their law enforcement taken over law enforcement with their teachings and their demands. So they chose to go out into the street to get their demands met. It has to do with oil. Oil subsidies. They want them removed permanently because they don't want their government to subsidize oil. Here in America, we're subsidizing oil. Is that a strategy? It's working for them, but they're willing to pay the price to remove these oil subsidies. It's a choice that they made by consensus. What we have is a responsibility. Not for us to benefit, but for us to create a vehicle for all people to benefit. And we have that capacity here in this room here. We have stories, we have the language, we have the commitment, we have the rights, the inherent rights. Across the world, indigenous people are restoring the rights of the rivers to remain clean, to be pure. They're singing to them by their ancestral names in ceremony. So they're also using ceremony. Is that a strategy? They're also reclaiming their sovereign economies, their rights to fish, hunt, gather medicine, meet at certain places, at certain times, to conduct a ritual annually, biannually, quarterly. That's their inherent right to do that on these sites where they want to put pipelines and oil refineries and observation towers. So we're not the only ones who are struggling, and believe me, there is a big movement all over the whole world to protect the water. So I know that we're not alone. I know that the treaties are the answer. I know that our language has the stories that we're supposed to hear so we can be invigorated, inspired, led That's how I'm here. I'm inspired to be here by my ancestors, by my sisters mostly. An elder before he passed away told me a dream that the Black Hills returned, would return to us, that we could manage our own waters, that management was ours. In this vision he had, women were coming out of a sweat lodge, like a womb. They were all coming out, pouring out, singing. They had papers in their hand. They said, the Black Hills have been returned to us. Our mother's alive. She is alive. These sovereign economies, we need to restore them. Hunt, fish, gather medicine. Wherever the buffalo roamed is where we went. So we have lots of land to protect. And we also have lots of areas to return to do the things that our ancestors have been doing. Is that a strategy? The UN Council needs to hear from us. They need to hear what it is that's happening to us, truthfully, honestly, and they need to hear what we want them to help us with. They want to see us solving our own problems. And that's what we're here to do today. So I just want to say, I want to thank you for every word that's going to be spoken here, and I want to say thank you for every deed that's going to come out of this group. It's going to protect our water and our land bases. There's an international movement with lawyers. They want your water to be protected, to be called by its name, to have rights to be pure and clean. They're there. They're on the internet. We can find them. We can do that on all our rivers. We can do that on our aquifers. There's many strategies out there. We just need to talk about them, find them, and decide which ones we're going to use. Or maybe we're going to use all of them. And we're going to split into groups here and say, I'm going to do this, well, I'm going to do that. Because it's going to take more than just one idea. It's going to take a multitude. That requires a lot of people. So we don't have any choice but to grow bigger. I'm looking forward to the day whenever I can hear the men and women not only saying that they're tribal members, but that they belong to a society to protect water. Because what we've been doing is we've been scouting. We've been scouting out the enemy. We've been doing whatever's necessary to stop the enemy from encroaching upon us. But they're here now. So all these societies we have need to fulfill them. Whatever the prophecies are, whatever their duties are, they need to be fulfilled now. So we need members, we need mentors, we need the elders to initiate and revive those societies. Because I'm more than just a member of a tribe. I'm a woman. And I have a lot of work to do. But it would make it much easier if I could belong to a women's society. I could choose that society, to have that society choose me. And the same for men. Have these societies that they can choose, they can get busy, and our goals can all be fulfilled. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, who's hungry? Who's Wochila? All right, you guys, if you need a ride, we have a van out front. Where's Odie? There she is. This is the driver. So follow her to the van if you want to ride. Otherwise, we're going to eat at the Oyakte Center, Lakota Homes. So you just take this 5th Street out here and go north. And then you'll come across Ashley Furniture. Turn at Ashley Furniture to the home. Don't go towards Lowe's. Go the west towards the Lakota Homes. There's the Ashley Furniture. And then you'll see the
It's like a housing cluster, and in that housing cluster in the center there, you'll see the Oyate Center. And we'll maybe try to put up a little flag or something for you so you can see where to go. Otherwise, you can follow us. And we'll come back over here at 1. I know there's a storm coming in, so we have, we're adjusting our speakers on the agenda to accommodate the storm and our travelers. So I think right after lunch, we're going to listen to Madonna. The Madonna Thunder Hakim. She'll share with us about back in the 80s when they held off uranium in that area. So, okay, thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to our stream today. We are at the inaugural No Uranium in Treaty Territory Summit in Rapid City, South Dakota. A lot of what has been talked about so far has been about treaties and the headwaters that are in those treaties and how the waters flow on top of the ground and also underneath, and how things are connected. And so when in situ uranium mining is done, there's really no containing it, and that it will, folks here believe it will contaminate the entire area. Jeff Parsons, who is an attorney for the Oglala Sioux Tribe in the contentions against the Dewey Burdock mining site by PowerTech USA, it spoke today, and he talked a lot about the NEPA, which is the National Environmental Protection Act, and how that has not been followed in the Dewey Burdock site processes so far. And then there was a strategy session where folks in the audience got to ask questions or make comments about different things that can be done and different ideas. So we are going to go down now. Thank you all for watching. If you appreciate this coverage and our coverage, our live coverage at the EPA public comment hearing on Saturday, you can go to our website at unicornriot.ninja, see our other work, and if you want to support us and help us continue this work, you can click on the donate tab and give a tax-deductible donation. Thank you all for watching, and we'll provide updates on how the summit continues and continue to provide updates on the proposed uranium mine by PowerTech USA. Thank you.
Yeah. And they were just sitting and listening to us.
Yeah.
Giving free information.
Yeah.
Or they use that free information to deal with that